Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. The smell hit me first. Bergamot and cedar, my signature cologne, hanging in the hallway like an accusation. It was 3:47 a.m. when I stumbled back to my loft, the taste of cheap beer still coating my throat, my key fumbling against the lock that wouldn't turn. The door was already locked, from the inside. I lived alone on the 7th floor of a converted warehouse in Northern Liberties, the kind of place where exposed brick met overpriced minimalism. The building's security was decent, key fob entry, cameras in the lobby, but nothing extraordinary. Standing there in that dimly lit hallway, pressing my ear against my own door, I could hear nothing but the hum of the building's ventilation system and my own quickening heartbeat. The rally had been electric. 3,000 bodies pressed together in Love Park, their collective anger rising like heat waves off summer asphalt. I'd gone for my journalism thesis, a piece on modern activism in the digital age, but found myself swept into the current of righteous fury. That's where I saw her, standing on an overturned milk crate, her voice cutting through the chaos with surgical precision. She spoke about surveillance, about the invisible eyes that tracked our every movement, about how privacy had become a luxury item sold back to us at premium prices. When the crowd dispersed, I'd approached her with the kind of confidence that only comes from 3 whiskey shots and impending graduation. She'd smiled at my invitation to the after party, her eyes holding mine a beat too long, and said she'd text me. The gathering at my place had been small, 6 or 7 people from my program, discussing revolution over craft cocktails until they'd filtered out around 11. She'd messaged at 11:43. Something came up. Rain check? Now. Standing in my hallway with that familiar scent wrapping around me like smoke. I tried the handle again. Still locked. I called out, knocked, then pounded. Nothing. The neighbor's door cracked open, revealing a sliver of annoyed face before slamming shut again. I ended up sleeping in my car, parked in the building's garage, watching the entrance on my phone's security app until dawn painted the concrete pink. When maintenance finally let me in the next morning, everything looked normal. Almost. My laptop sat 1 inch to the left of where I always placed it, aligned with the table's edge. The wine glass I'd left on the counter faced the opposite direction. My books, always spine out, alphabetized, had been subtly rearranged, Kafka now coming before Joyce. These weren't things maintenance would notice, or anyone else for that matter. But I knew. The way you know your own reflection has changed even when you can't pinpoint exactly how. The building's security footage showed nothing unusual in the hallways. But I had my own camera, a small device I'd installed inside the loft after my bike was stolen from the garage last year. My hands shook as I scrolled through the night's recording on my laptop, the timestamp glowing. 2:23 a.m. The figure entered with fluid precision, using a key that turned smoothly in the lock. The infrared made everything ghostly, but I could see them moving through my space with deliberate calm. They touched things, ran fingers along my bookshelf, opened my refrigerator and stared into its lit interior for 30 seconds, picked up the framed photo of my sister and studied it. Then they moved to where I slept on the couch, standing there for 7 minutes and 43 seconds. The figure pulled out a phone, its flashlight creating a white bloom in the darkness as they leaned down, recording my sleeping face from different angles. The quality wasn't clear enough to make out features, but the build, the way they moved, it matched her. The activist. I'd never told her my address, but these days that meant nothing. A name, a photo, and anyone could find anyone. I changed the locks that afternoon, installed a chain, added a doorstop alarm. I told myself it was precaution, not paranoia. But that night, as I lay in bed listening to every creak and settling of the old building, my phone buzzed. An audio message from an unknown number. 23 seconds of someone breathing, slow, measured, deliberate, and then the unmistakable sound of a key turning in a lock. My lock, the new one I'd just installed. Sleep became impossible. I started leaving lights on, playing music at low volume to mask the building's sounds. During the day, I'd catch myself checking and rechecking the placement of objects, taking photos to compare later. My thesis advisor noticed the bags under my eyes, suggested I take a break, but how could I explain that my home had become a stage where someone else was directing the show? 3 nights later, I woke to find my window open. 7th floor, no fire escape, no logical way for anyone to access it from outside. The curtains moved like breathing in the October wind. On the sill, arranged with careful precision, sat 3 items. A wine glass, mine, from the kitchen, a single page torn from my copy of The Trial, the scene where Kay realizes he's being watched, and a USB drive I'd never seen before. The USB contained a single video file, 40 minutes of footage showing me over the past 2 weeks, at the coffee shop where I wrote, walking to class, shopping at the grocery store, sitting in the library, always from a distance, always when I was alone, always ending just as I seemed to notice something and turned around. The last clip showed me sleeping in my car that first night, filmed from outside the garage, my face illuminated by my phone screen as I obsessively checked the security feeds. I went to the police. The desk sergeant took notes with the enthusiasm of someone filling out tax forms. Without evidence of a crime, no theft, no vandalism, no explicit threats, there was little they could do. She suggested I stay with friends for a while, change my routines, consider therapy for stress. But I couldn't shake the feeling that leaving would mean losing some essential battle I didn't fully understand. So I stayed, installing more cameras, more locks, sleeping in shifts. I started seeing her everywhere. A flash of familiar movement in my peripheral vision, a figure that looked like her 3 people ahead in the subway crowd, always gone when I looked directly. The messages continued. Audio files of ambient noise from places I recognized. My favorite bar, the university library, the park where I ran. Sometimes there'd be whispers underneath, words I couldn't quite make out no matter how much I amplified the sound. Photos appeared under my door, not of me, but of spaces I'd just left. My empty chair at the coffee shop, still warm. My bookmark on a library table. My running shoes in the park, taken from an angle that suggested the photographer had been lying in the grass, waiting. 2 weeks in, I found her manifesto. Not online, but printed and slipped into my thesis notes. It talked about breaking down the barriers between observer and observed, about how surveillance had made us all performers in a play we never auditioned for, about how the only way to reclaim agency was to become the director of someone else's paranoia, to make them feel what we all feel, watched, cataloged, interpreted by invisible eyes. Was I an experiment? A point being proven? Or had I simply caught the attention of someone who'd found a new way to redistribute the discomfort of modern life? The wine glass started appearing in different places each morning. Always clean, always perfectly positioned, like a chess piece being moved across the board of my apartment. I stopped using it, hid it in a cabinet, but it would materialize anyway. On my nightstand, balanced on the bathroom sink, centered on my laptop keyboard. I began to question my own memory. Had I moved it myself in some fugue state? Was the stress fracturing my perception? The boundary between what was happening and what I feared was happening blurred until they became indistinguishable. Every sound could be her. Every absence of sound could be her holding her breath, waiting. Last night I woke to find all my books turned spine in, their blank pages facing outward like closed eyes. My laptop was open, displaying a single sentence typed in a document I didn't create. You're becoming such a good observer. This morning, I discovered something that made my blood crystallize. Hidden in my browser history were searches I didn't make, from times when I was asleep. Searches about myself, using my computer, from inside my apartment. Queries about my family, my medical history, my ex-girlfriends. Someone had been here, multiple times, using my own tools to study me while I slept inches away. The most recent search, time-stamped at 4:44 a.m. this morning. How long before isolation becomes madness? I'm writing this from a hotel room across the city, but I know it doesn't matter. The feeling follows me. That sensation of being watched, cataloged, transformed into someone else's narrative. My phone buzzes with another audio message. This time it's my own voice, recorded while I slept, mumbling incoherently about keys and locks and eyes that won't close. The activist was right about one thing: we're all being watched. But she was wrong about who holds the power. It's not the watcher or the watched. It's the uncertainty itself, the space between paranoia and reality where both exist simultaneously, feeding off each other like binary stars locked in mutual orbit. I check out tomorrow, planning to stay with my sister in Boston. But tonight, as I listen to footsteps in the hotel hallway that pause too long outside my door, as I notice the faint scent of bergamot and cedar creeping under the gap, as my phone lights up with a photo of this room taken from the building across the street, I realize the performance has no final curtain. The wine glass sits on the hotel desk now, though I didn't pack it. Inside, reflecting in the fluorescent light, I can see a key I don't recognize. It's brass, freshly cut, with a number etched into its surface. 744, my sister's apartment number in Boston. The walls aren't just closing in. They're being carefully, methodically rearranged by hands I'll never quite see, for reasons I'll never quite understand. And the worst part, the part that keeps me staring at the ceiling while my phone records the sound of my own breathing, is that I'm no longer sure whether I want it to stop, or whether I've become addicted to the terrible clarity that comes from knowing, with absolute certainty, that someone is always watching. Because at least when you're being watched, you know you exist. At least when you're being watched, you matter to someone. Even if that someone is reshaping your reality 1 millimeter at a time, until you can't remember which version of your life was the original and which is the copy. The key glints in the glass, waiting. Tomorrow, I'll use it. Or tomorrow, I'll throw it away. Or tomorrow, I'll wake up to find it already turned in a lock I didn't know existed. The performance continues. Story 2. The smell hit me first that night. Pipe tobacco mixed with machine grease, dense and metallic, coating the back of my throat. My eyes snapped open at 3:17 a.m., the red digits on my bedside clock burning into my retinas. I knew before I even turned my head. He was there. The old man from the bookshop sat at my desk, his back to me, shoulders hunched over the zine I'd taken 3 days earlier. His fingers, encased in white cotton gloves, turned the pages with mechanical precision. The chain on my door hung intact, the deadbolt still thrown. The window remained locked from the inside, condensation beating on the glass from the Wisconsin cold. I should have screamed, should have reached for my phone, the baseball bat under my bed, something. Instead, I lay frozen, watching cigarette smoke curl from an invisible source, forming patterns that shouldn't exist in still air. The smoke spelled words I couldn't quite read before dissolving into nothing. He spoke without turning, his voice like sandpaper on wet wood. You take what isn't offered. You collect what shortens the soul. The zine in his hands, Borrowed Time, Issue 7, Winter 1982, wasn't meant to exist. I'd found it wedged behind a false panel in the shop's basement, covered in dust that felt older than the building itself. The shop owner had caught me examining it, his gray eyes narrowing behind wire-rimmed glasses. He'd told me it wasn't for sale, would never be for sale, that some things were meant to stay buried, but I'd slipped it into my jacket anyway when he turned to help another customer. Just borrowed it, I told myself. I'd return it eventually. Now he sat in my apartment, 3 stories up, behind a chained door. Time doesn't flow the way you think, he continued, still facing away. The pages turned with a rhythmic whisper. This scene, these words, they're not ink on paper. They're moments stolen from somewhere else. Someone else. I found my voice, though it came out strangled. How did you get in here? He laughed, a sound like grinding gears. I've always been here. Check your lease. Check the signature. My mouth went dry. The lease I'd signed 2 months ago sat in my desk drawer, the same desk where he now sat. I'd never looked closely at the previous tenant's information, just signed where indicated and moved in, desperate for affordable housing near campus. Every page you read, he said, takes a day from the intended reader, the one who was meant to find it, the one who needed those words at that precise moment. You've stolen 7 pages, 7 days that belong to someone else. The air in the room thickened, pressing against my eardrums. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting in a rhythm that matched neither my heartbeat nor his methodical page-turning. Shadows moved independently of their sources, stretching across the ceiling in impossible directions. "I'll give it back," I whispered. Too late for that. He finally turned to face me, and I wished he hadn't. His face was mine, but older, decades older, skin like parchment, eyes milky with cataracts. "You've already read it. The words are in you now, displacing what should have been." I scrambled out of bed, my legs tangling in the sheets. The floor felt wrong under my feet, too soft, like stepping on flesh. The man who wasn't quite a man stood slowly, joints popping like firecrackers. He set the zine on my desk with reverent care. "Madison has always been a crossroads," he said, moving toward the door without walking, more like sliding through space. "The lakes, the isthmus, natural boundaries where things get confused. Past, present, future. What's borrowed? What's stolen? What's owed?" The chain on my door fell away without being touched. The deadbolt turned on its own. "Keep the zine," he said from the doorway. "But know that every collection has a price. Every borrowed thing demands return with interest." Then he was gone, leaving only the smell of tobacco and grease, and the zine sitting on my desk like an accusation. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. When dawn finally broke through my window, painting the walls a sickly yellow, I found the courage to approach the desk. Next to the zine lay a bookmark I'd never seen before. Old, yellowed, with an address written in fading ink. My address. But the handwriting looked ancient, the ink brown with age. The date at the top read, 1952. Beneath the bookmark were 3 photographs, slightly out of focus, showing my apartment from different angles. My furniture, my books, my clothes scattered on the chair. But the quality of the photos suggested they were decades old, the edges yellowed and curling. In one photo, barely visible in the corner, stood a figure that might have been me, or might have been someone who looked like me, from a time before I was born. I picked up the zine with trembling hands. The cover, which had shown a crude drawing of a clock melting into a human face, now displayed something different. A room that looked exactly like mine, with a figure hunched over a desk, reading. The figure's face was turned away, but something about the posture, the way the shoulders curved, seemed familiar. Opening to the first page, I found the text had changed. Where before there had been an essay about temporal displacement in Midwest cities, now there was a diary entry, October 15th, 1952. "The new tenant moves in today. I've left him the collection as instructed. He won't understand at first, they never do. But Madison keeps its own schedule, and debts pass from resident to resident like inherited sins. I wonder if he'll feel me watching from the walls, the way I felt the previous owner. Time isn't a line here, it's a web, and every thread vibrates when touched." My hands shook as I turned the page. October 16th, 1952. He started reading. I can feel the words leaving the page, entering him. Soon he'll understand that reading isn't passive. Every story consumed is a story stolen from somewhere else. Someone else. The building knows. It's been collecting readers for longer than anyone remembers. The entries continued, each one seemingly written about me, decades before I existed. Or about someone exactly like me. Or about everyone who had ever lived in this apartment. Our stories blurring together like overlapping photographs. I tried to put the zine down, but my fingers wouldn't release it. The pages turned on their own now, faster and faster, showing me things I didn't want to see. Photos of my room from angles that didn't exist, maps of Madison with streets that had never been built, lists of names, mine included, with dates that hadn't happened yet. The smell of tobacco and grease grew stronger. I realized it wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from me. My clothes reeked of it. My skin had absorbed it. When I looked in the mirror above my desk, my reflection was wearing clothes I didn't own, styles from decades past. The bookmark on my desk began to move, sliding across the wood grain like it was being pulled by an invisible string. It stopped at the edge, teetering, then fell to the floor. Where it landed, a dark stain spread across the hardwood, seeping into the grain. The stain formed letters, words, sentences I couldn't quite read, but somehow understood. You are the collection now. I ran to the door, yanking it open, needing to escape. The hallway stretched longer than it should, doors multiplying into infinity. Each door had a number, but they were all the same. My apartment number, repeated endlessly. Behind each door, I could hear the sound of pages turning. I stumbled back into my apartment, slamming the door. The zine lay open on my desk, showing a new image, the bookshop basement where I'd found it. But in the photo, I could see myself reaching for the zine, frozen in the act of taking it. And behind me, visible now in a way he hadn't been that day, stood the old man, watching, waiting, knowing. The photo began to move, like a film starting up. I watched myself take the zine, slip it into my jacket. But then the scene continued past what I remembered. I saw myself leave the shop, walk down State Street, enter my building. The old man followed, always a step behind, sometimes ahead, sometimes walking through the same space I occupied, our bodies overlapping like double exposures. The voice, when it came, seemed to originate from inside my skull. Every book has a reader. Every reader has a book. The connection exists outside time, before the reading, after the reading, during the reading. You've entered the collection. You've always been in the collection. I grabbed the zine, intending to destroy it, to burn it, to tear it apart. But the pages were no longer paper. They felt like skin, warm and pulsing. The words weren't printed. They were carved, rising from the surface like scars. And they were changing, rewriting themselves as I watched, telling a story I recognized but had never lived. Or had I? The memories in my head felt suddenly uncertain. Had I really moved to Madison 2 months ago? Or had I always been here, in this apartment, reading this zine? The bookmark with my address? Was it prediction or proof that I'd been here before? I looked at my hands. They were older than they should be, the skin spotted and thin. Or were they younger, smooth and unmarked? They seemed to shift between states, aging and reversing with each heartbeat. The photographs on my desk multiplied. Now there were dozens, all showing my apartment at different times. In some, the furniture was different. In others, the walls were different colors. But in each one, a figure sat at the desk, hunched over, reading. Sometimes it looked like me. Sometimes it looked like the old man. Sometimes it looked like no one at all. Just an empty space in the shape of a person. I tried to call someone, anyone, but my phone showed no contacts. The call log was empty except for one number, labeled only collection. I didn't dial it. I knew who would answer. Days passed, or maybe minutes. The clock on my nightstand stopped making sense, showing times that couldn't exist. 25:91, 88:43. The sun rose and set at random intervals, or perhaps it was always rising, always setting, caught in a loop like everything else in this apartment. The zine grew. New pages appeared between the old ones, telling stories I almost remembered about people I might have known. Each story felt like a memory stolen from another life, another time, another version of Madison where the lakes were different colors and the streets ran in impossible directions. I found myself at the desk constantly now, reading, unable to stop. The words entered through my eyes and exited through my fingers, which had begun to write in the margins, adding to the collection. My handwriting looked different each time, sometimes modern, sometimes archaic, sometimes in languages I didn't know but somehow understood. The old man visited nightly, or perhaps he never left. We sat together, him reading over my shoulder, pointing out passages I'd missed, stories within stories, meanings hidden in the space between words. He told me about the others who'd lived here, read here, become part of the collection here. Their names were all variations of mine, or mine was a variation of theirs. The building is a library, he explained once, his voice coming from everywhere and nowhere. Each apartment is a book. Each tenant is a page. You're being read right now, even as you read. I wanted to leave, but couldn't remember why I'd want to. The apartment felt larger than before, rooms opening into rooms that opened into libraries that opened into other apartments, where other versions of me sat reading other versions of the zine. We nodded to each other in passing, understanding without speaking that we were all part of the same story, told from different angles. The bookmark appeared in different places each day, tucked into books I'd never opened, slipped under doors that led nowhere, floating in glasses of water that appeared on my nightstand. Each time I found it, the address was different, showing places I'd lived or would live or was living simultaneously. Madison itself seemed to shift around my building. Through my window, I could see the lakes rearranging themselves, sometimes two, sometimes four, sometimes an ocean that had never existed. The Capitol building moved like a chess piece, appearing on different squares of the city grid. Time flowed backward during thunderstorms, forward during snow, and stopped entirely when the fog rolled in. I understood now why the zine couldn't be sold, only borrowed. It didn't belong to anyone because it belonged to everyone who'd ever read it, ever would read it, was reading it right now in all the infinite nows that existed in this space between the lakes. The old man was me, would be me, had been me. The shop in the basement was my shop, where I'd refused to sell the zine to another young man who would take it anyway, starting the cycle again, or continuing it, or ending it. Time didn't work that way here. I write this now, then, always, as a warning, invitation, explanation, to whoever finds it, has found it, will find it. The zine sits on my desk, growing heavier with each page added, each story collected. I am the collector now, and the collected, the borrowed and the lender, the reader and the read. Sometimes late at night, early in the morning, in the eternal afternoon, I hear footsteps in the hallway. Someone is coming to take what I've borrowed. Someone is coming to return what they've taken. Someone is coming to continue the collection. The door is chained from the inside. It always has been. But that has never mattered here, in this apartment between apartments, this Madison between Madisons, this story between stories. Check your lease. Check the signature. You might be surprised whose name you find. Story 3. The job listing had seemed perfect. 2 weeks watching a couple's dogs in their cabin near Bend while they vacationed in Europe. Easy money, I'd thought. The photos showed a rustic but comfortable place nestled among pines, complete with a wood-burning stove and mountain views. What they hadn't shown was the ancient tube TV that dominated the living room like some prehistoric altar, or the way the windows caught reflections at angles that shouldn't exist. I arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, the October air crisp enough to bite through my jacket. The owners, a couple in their 50s with matching fleece vests and nervous smiles, gave me the tour while their 2 mastiffs, massive, brindle-coated beasts, watched from the corner with an intelligence that felt almost human. The husband explained the quirks. The hot water took 3 minutes to warm up. The upstairs bedroom door stuck if you didn't lift while turning the knob, and the TV occasionally picked up static but usually cleared if you gave it a solid thump. They left within the hour, their SUV disappearing down the gravel drive while I stood on the porch, suddenly aware of how quiet the forest could be. The first night passed without incident. I spent it on the couch with the dogs flanking me, their warm bulk reassuring as I scrolled through my phone and half-watched whatever cable news the old TV could pull from the air. The static came in waves, quick flickers that made the anchor's face stretch and distort before snapping back to normal. Each time it happened, both dogs would shift slightly, their breathing changing rhythm for just a moment. It was the second night when I first saw it. I'd been checking emails, the TV murmuring in the background, when movement in my peripheral vision made me glance up. In the dark window behind the TV, Illuminated by the screen's glow, stood a figure. Angular, metallic somehow, like someone had tried to fold a person out of aluminum and gotten the proportions wrong. My head snapped around, but the space behind the couch was empty. Just shadows and the stone fireplace. The dogs hadn't barked. They hadn't even looked up. I told myself it was exhaustion, maybe a trick of the light reflecting off something outside. But my hands shook as I drew the curtains, and I found myself checking the locks twice before heading upstairs. The bedroom felt safer, tucked under the slanted roof with only one small window facing the trees. The dogs followed me up but stopped at the top of the stairs, their massive heads turning away from the hallway, as if something there offended them. I had to coax them into the room, and even then, they positioned themselves facing the door, backs to the window. Sleep came in fragments. Every creak of the cabin settling jolted me awake, and twice I could have sworn I heard the TV turn on downstairs, that distinctive hum of the tube warming up. But when I crept to the landing to listen, silence pressed back. By the fourth day, the static had become constant, not overwhelming, just persistent, a snow of interference that made watching anything impossible. I tried adjusting the antenna, checking the cables, even gave it the recommended thump. Nothing worked. The figures on screen moved through their routines behind a veil of white noise, their voices distorted into something that almost sounded like whispering when I wasn't paying attention. That's when I started seeing it during the day, too. Always in reflections, the microwave door, the bathroom mirror, the glass covering a framed photo in the hallway. That same angular form, sometimes standing, sometimes seeming to move with jerky, too fast motions that my eye could never quite track. But every time I turned, nothing. Just empty space and the dogs, who had taken to lying in the exact center of whatever room I occupied, equidistant from all walls. I tried to rationalize it. Mountain elevation could cause hallucinations. I'd read that somewhere. Or maybe carbon monoxide. Old cabin, wood stove. It made sense. I opened all the windows despite the cold and bought a detector from the hardware store in town. It never went off. The owner's instructions had mentioned a notebook for recording any issues, and I found myself writing in it obsessively. TV static worsening, dogs acting strange, seeing things, then crossing it all out, starting over. Everything fine, beautiful views, dogs healthy. The truth felt too insane to commit to paper. By the end of the first week, I'd developed a routine. Avoid reflective surfaces. Keep the dogs close. Never look directly at the TV, only at the wall beside it. Don't go upstairs after dark unless absolutely necessary. The rules felt arbitrary but essential, like breathing underwater. Unnatural, but vital. The thing in the reflections was getting clearer. I could make out more details in my peripheral vision. Joints that bent in too many places. A head that seemed to swivel independent of its body. Appendages that weren't quite arms reaching toward the glass from the other side. It never appeared when I was looking directly at a reflection, only when my attention was elsewhere. A hunter's patience. The dogs had stopped eating on day 9. They'd drink water, accept the occasional treat, but their food bowls remained untouched. They'd also stopped going upstairs entirely, planting themselves at the bottom of the steps like sentries whenever I needed to go up. Their eyes would track something I couldn't see, heads moving in slow synchronization as they followed its movement across the landing. I started sleeping on the couch. The static had evolved into patterns. Late at night, if I let my vision blur, I could almost see shapes in the interference. Geometric forms that reminded me of the figure but more complex, like blueprints for something that shouldn't exist. The whispers had grown louder too. Not quite words, but close enough to make me strain to understand. Sometimes I thought I heard my name, stretched and distorted through the white noise. On day 12, I broke one of my rules. I looked directly at the TV while the static was at its worst, and for just a moment, I saw myself on the screen. Not a reflection. The angle was wrong for that. I was sitting on the couch watching TV, but in the image, something stood behind me. Tall, angular, one too long arm reaching toward my shoulder. The me on screen didn't react, didn't seem to know it was there. I turned around so fast I pulled a muscle in my neck. Empty room. Just the dogs, who had moved to press against the front door, whining softly. That night, I couldn't stop checking the windows. Each one showed the same thing. My reflection, the room behind me, and sometimes, for just a fraction of a second, something else. It was getting bolder, staying visible for longer moments. I could make out what might have been a face, though the features were arranged wrong, like someone had described human anatomy to something that had never seen it. The owners called on day 13 to check in. Their voices sounded thin and far away, like the connection was bad despite my phone showing full bars. They asked about the dogs, the cabin, if everything was running smoothly. I heard myself saying yes, everything was perfect, while watching their dogs huddle together in the corner, facing the wall. They mentioned they'd extended their trip by 3 days. Would that be a problem? No, I heard myself say. No problem at all. After the call, I found marks on the windows, thin scratches on the outside of the glass, arranged in patterns that hurt to look at directly. They were on every window, even the second-story ones, even the small bathroom window that didn't open. I tried to photograph them, but my phone's camera wouldn't focus, producing only blurred images that looked like static. The final night, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed my things, left a note saying there was a family emergency, and carried my bags to the car. The dogs followed me out, moving faster than they had in days, practically running to the vehicle. But I'd forgotten something. My phone charger, still plugged in upstairs. I had to go back. The house felt different, empty, larger somehow, like the walls had pulled back while I was outside. The TV was on, though I was certain I'd turned it off. Pure static, louder than before, filling the space with white noise that seemed to have physical weight. I climbed the stairs, each step a decision I had to force myself to make. The charger was beside the bed. As I unplugged it, movement in the window made me look up. There, in the reflection, it stood complete and clear for the first time. Not behind me, beside me, close enough to touch. Angular metal limbs, too many joints, a face that was more suggestion than feature. It raised one arm in a slow, deliberate motion. A wave. I ran. Down the stairs, through the door, into my car where the dogs were already howling. As I reversed down the drive, I couldn't help but look up at the bedroom window. There it was, silhouetted against the interior light, that same arm raised. A goodbye, or a promise. The radio, which I hadn't turned on, crackled to life. 3 seconds of deep, grinding static that rose and fell in a pattern eerily similar to the gesture I'd just seen. Then silence. I drove through the night, stopping only for gas, the dog silent in the back seat. It wasn't until I reached Portland that I realized I could see it in every reflection. Windows, mirrors, puddles on the rain-slicked streets. Fainter now, like a watermark, but there, following. The owners never contacted me about leaving early. The payment hit my account in full, plus a generous tip. Sometimes I wonder if they knew, if that's why they really left, pawning off whatever haunted that cabin onto someone desperate enough for money to take the job. I avoid reflections now, covered my bathroom mirror, replaced my TV with a projector that casts onto a white wall. But sometimes, in the corner of my eye, in the black screen of my powered-off phone or the window of a passing car, I see it, still waving, still following, getting clearer. The dogs, I kept them. The owners never asked for them back, and somehow I knew they wouldn't. They sleep in my room now, always facing the door, always watching something I pretend not to see. We have an understanding, the three of us. We don't look at reflections. We don't acknowledge the static that sometimes fills the silence. We don't talk about what followed us home from Bend, but late at night, when the world is quiet enough, I can hear it in the walls. That same metallic scraping, like something angular trying to find the right shape to fit through, waiting for me to look, really look, at what's been standing beside me all along. The static is getting louder. Story 4. The smell hit me before I even crossed the threshold. Not just mold, but something underneath it, like machine oil mixed with copper pennies. I should have trusted my gut right then. Should have made an excuse about being double booked and driven away from that pristine colonial in Brighton Hills. But the woman standing in the doorway had already paid my consultation fee up front, and in Rochester's November, you don't turn down indoor work. She introduced herself with a smile that never quite reached her eyes, her hands clasped in front of her floral apron like she was posing for a 1950s cookbook. Very independent, she'd said on the phone 3 times, emphasizing it each time like it was crucial I understood. Now, watching her lead me through her immaculate home, I noticed how her footsteps made no sound on the hardwood floors, how she seemed to glide rather than walk. The basement door was behind the kitchen, painted the same eggshell white as the walls around it. She produced a key from her apron pocket, an odd detail that nagged at me even then. Who locks their basement from the outside? The smell started last week, she explained, her voice maintaining that same pleasant, measured tone that customer service representatives use. I've tried everything. Dehumidifiers, bleach, those activated charcoal bags. Nothing works. The wooden stairs creaked under my weight, each step releasing a groan that seemed to echo longer than it should. The basement was finished, which surprised me given the age of the house. Fresh gray paint covered the walls, so recent I could still detect the chemical scent beneath that pervasive moldiness. 4 metal support columns stood in perfect symmetry, their surfaces polished to a mirror shine that reflected my distorted image as I descended. She followed me down, and I heard the door swing shut above us. The click of the latch was followed by another sound, metal sliding against metal. When I glanced back up the stairs, she was already beside me, that practiced smile still in place. "Old house," she said. "The door sticks sometimes." The basement was larger than I'd expected, extending beyond the footprint of the house above. In the center of the concrete floor, a drain cover gleamed like new chrome, completely at odds with what should have been decades-old plumbing. I knelt beside it, running my fingers along the edge. The concrete around it had been recently poured, maybe within the last month, but it was the marks on the original concrete that made my skin prickle. Dark stains spread out from each support column like shadows, their edges irregular and organic. They looked like handprints, dozens of them, as if someone covered in motor oil had pressed their palms against the floor while crawling. The marks led toward the walls but stopped abruptly where the new paint began. Previous owner had some water damage, the woman explained before I could ask. She stood perfectly still near the stairs, hands still folded, watching me with an intensity that made me hyper-aware of every movement I made. I pulled out my moisture meter and began taking readings along the walls. The numbers were normal, too normal for a basement that supposedly reeked of mold. As I worked, I became conscious of a low humming, almost below the range of hearing, like electrical current running through the walls themselves. "Do you have any electrical panels down here?" I asked. She tilted her head slightly, considering. "No. Why do you ask?" I started to explain about the humming when I noticed something else. A small intercom speaker mounted in the corner where the wall met the ceiling. It was painted the same gray as the walls, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. As I stared at it, a red LED blinked once. "Is that connected to your security system?" "We're very safety conscious," she replied, which wasn't really an answer. I continued my inspection, but the feeling of being watched intensified. Not just by her, though she tracked my every movement with those unblinking eyes, but by something else. The metal columns seemed to shift in my peripheral vision, their reflections showing movement that wasn't there. When I looked directly at them, they were still, but the distorted image of myself looked wrong somehow, like it was a second out of sync with my actual movements. The smell grew stronger near the far wall, where a utility closet door stood slightly ajar. I approached it, and the woman finally moved, gliding across the floor to stand between me and the door. "That's just storage," she said. "Nothing to do with the plumbing." But I'd already glimpsed inside, shelves lined with mason jars, each filled with what looked like preserves but with an unusual gray-green tint. Labels in precise handwriting marked dates going back years, some with additional notations I couldn't quite read. "I should check all potential sources of moisture," I insisted, professional courtesy struggling against the growing urge to leave. Her smile widened just a fraction. "Of course. You're the expert." She stepped aside, and I opened the closet fully. The smell intensified dramatically, making my eyes water. The jars were sealed tight, but something inside them moved. Not quite liquid, not quite solid. One jar in particular drew my attention, its contents pressing against the glass in a pattern that looked disturbingly like a small hand. I backed out of the closet, my heart racing. "I need to get some equipment from my van." "Oh, but you haven't seen the whole basement yet," she said. And for the first time, her tone carried something other than that artificial pleasantness. "There's another room through here." She walked to what I'd assumed was just wall, but her fingers found a seam in the paint. A section swung inward, a hidden door painted to match perfectly. Beyond was darkness that my eyes couldn't penetrate, and from it came a smell that made the mold seem pleasant by comparison. Organic and wrong, like flowers left too long in water. "I really should get my equipment," I repeated, moving toward the stairs. The intercom crackled to life. A voice, identical to the woman's but somehow flatter, more mechanical, spoke. "The noise doesn't help." I froze. The woman hadn't moved her lips. "My husband," she explained, though I'd seen no evidence of anyone else in the house. "He works from home, very sensitive to sound." I climbed the first few steps and the door at the top rattled. Locked. I pushed harder, and the rattling intensified, but the door didn't budge. Behind me, the woman watched with that same serene expression. "It sticks," she reminded me. "Old house." The intercom crackled again. "The noise doesn't help." My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone. No signal, of course. I descended back into the basement, trying to keep my breathing steady. The woman had moved closer to the hidden door, and in the darkness beyond, I could swear I saw movement, a shifting that wasn't quite shadow. "Perhaps you'd like to see what's causing the smell," she suggested. Every instinct screamed at me to refuse, but I found myself walking toward that doorway, my feet moving almost without my permission. The darkness seemed to reach out, and as I got closer, I could make out shapes, more metal columns, but these were different. They had attachments, mechanisms I couldn't quite identify, and chains that glinted in what little light penetrated the space. The intercom spoke again, but this time the voice was different. Younger, masculine, frightened. "The noise doesn't help." Then another voice, elderly and female. "The noise doesn't help." More voices joined in, a chorus of different ages and tones, all repeating the same phrase until it became a meaningless jumble of sound. I stumbled backward, and my shoulder hit one of the polished columns. Where my hand touched it, the metal was warm, body temperature, and beneath my palm, I felt a pulse. Not mechanical, but organic, rhythmic, alive. The woman stood between me and the stairs now, though I hadn't seen her move. "You seem distressed. Would you like some water?" "I need to leave," I managed to say. "I'll send you an estimate." "But you haven't found the source of the smell." The hidden room's darkness seemed to be spreading, creeping along the walls like spilled ink. The stains on the concrete floor appeared wet now, glistening in the overhead light. The humming grew louder, resolving into something almost like breathing, deep, patient inhalations, and exhalations that made the air itself feel thick. I pushed past her and ran up the stairs, slamming my shoulder against the door. It rattled but held firm. Behind me, I heard her climbing the stairs with those silent footsteps. "There's no need for panic," she said. "You're here to do a job." The intercom voices had merged into a single discordant tone that made my teeth ache. I pulled out my phone again, desperately trying to find even one bar of signal. The screen flickered, showing not my home screen but a video feed, grainy black and white footage of the basement from above. In it, I could see myself standing by the door, the woman behind me. But there was something else too. The dark stains on the floor were moving in the video, crawling toward the walls, and in the hidden room, shapes that might have been people stood perfectly still, their faces turned up toward the camera. The house alarm suddenly shrieked to life, a piercing wail that cut through everything else. The woman's expression finally changed, shifting from that serene smile to something like annoyance. Through the door, I heard voices. Neighbors asking if everything was all right. Someone saying they'd called the police. The lock clicked open. I burst through the door, nearly colliding with an elderly man in a bathrobe who'd come in through the front door. Behind him, a couple more neighbors had gathered on the lawn. False alarm, the woman said smoothly, appearing beside me as if she'd simply materialized there. The system's been acting up. This gentleman was just checking our basement plumbing. She walked the neighbors out, apologizing profusely, maintaining that perfect hostess persona. I gathered my tools with shaking hands, not trusting myself to speak. As I loaded my van, she stood in the doorway watching me. "I'll expect that estimate," she called out, her voice carrying that same pleasant tone from our first phone call. "We're very eager to resolve the problem." I drove away without looking back, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. It wasn't until I got home that I realized I'd left my moisture meter in the basement. I wasn't going back for it. That night, I typed up a basic estimate for replacing a drain trap and emailed it to her, determined to have no further contact. My phone buzzed almost immediately with her response. The message contained no text, just an attachment. I opened it against my better judgment. It was a photograph of the basement, taken from directly above, showing me kneeling by the drain. But I'd been alone down there. The woman had been standing by the stairs. In the photo, the dark stains on the floor were clearly visible, spreading out from each column in perfect handprint patterns. But there was something else that made my blood run cold. In each of the polished metal columns, in their reflective surfaces, I could see faces. Distorted, elongated, but unmistakably human faces, pressed against the inside of the metal as if the columns were hollow and people were trapped within. And in the background, barely visible in the doorway to the hidden room, more figures stood in perfect stillness. I deleted the email and blocked her number, but sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and I'm lying in bed, I swear I can hear that intercom voice, mechanical and insistent. The noise doesn't help. I've thought about calling the police, but what would I tell them? That a basement smelled like mold? That a door stuck? That I got spooked by some preserves and shadows? They'd laugh me out of the station. But I know what I felt in that basement. That warmth, that pulse, that sense of something vast and wrong lurking just beneath the surface of normal life. Sometimes I drive past the house. I can't help myself, and it looks perfectly ordinary. There are even toys in the yard now, and a minivan in the driveway. New family, I guess. I wonder if they've been in the basement. I wonder if they've heard the voices. I wonder if they've noticed that sometimes, in the reflection of those windows, you can see faces that aren't there, pressed against glass that should be empty, watching from rooms that shouldn't exist. But mostly I wonder about that photo, because in it, in the very corner, barely visible, there's a timestamp, and it's dated 3 days before I ever set foot in that house. The noise doesn't help, but the silence might be worse. Story 5. The snow was falling heavier than usual that February night when I locked up the bar. Buffalo winters are brutal, but this one felt different, thicker somehow, like the air itself had crystallized into something oppressive. The streetlights created amber halos in the swirling white, and my breath came out in clouds that seemed to hang too long before dissipating. I'd been closing alone for 3 months by then. The owner trusted me with the keys, the cash, the whole routine. Lock the doors, count the till, set the alarm, walk home. Simple, mechanical. The kind of repetition that lets your mind wander to places it shouldn't go at 2 in the morning. That's when I first noticed the van. White, unmarked, moving slow enough that its tires barely whispered against the fresh powder. No plates. I was sure of that even through the snow. The headlights were off, but I could see it clearly under the street lamps, creeping along at exactly my walking pace. When I stopped to pretend to check my phone, it stopped too, engine purring like something patient and predatory. My apartment was 8 blocks away. I knew every shortcut, every alley. every gap in the chain link fences. Growing up here teaches you the geography of escape routes. So when I ducked into Riverside Cemetery, the old section where the headstones lean at impossible angles, I figured I'd lose whoever was playing games. The cemetery gates squealed when I pushed through, rust flaking off in my gloved hands. The snow was virgin here, untouched except for my own footprints cutting a diagonal toward the far exit. Behind me, I heard the van's engine idle, then die. No door slam, no footsteps following. Just silence so complete it made my ears ring. That's when I saw them, the other prints. They circled the cemetery's perimeter, massive indentations that looked almost human, but wrong in every way that mattered. Too wide, too deep. The stride length suggested something well over 7 feet tall, and the pattern showed whoever or whatever had made them had walked the entire boundary of my usual route home. Not just tonight's route, every variation I'd taken in the past month. They overlapped in places, some fresher than others, creating a map of my movements that made my stomach turn to ice water. I ran, not the controlled jog of someone late for something, but the primitive sprint of prey that's finally understood its position in the food chain. My boots slipped on ice-slicked headstones, and I crashed into monuments whose names had been worn smooth by decades of lake-effect weather. When I finally burst through my apartment building's door, the security guard looked up from his crossword, eyebrows raised. I wanted to tell him about the van, about the prints, but the words died in my throat. How do you explain that feeling of being cataloged? Studied? I just nodded, took the stairs 3 at a time, and didn't stop until I had my door locked, deadbolted, and chain secured behind me. Sleep was impossible. I sat at my window, watching the street below through a gap in the blinds. The van never appeared, but something else did. A shadow that moved wrong, too fluid, stopping under each streetlight to look up at the buildings. At my building. At my window. I jerked back, heart hammering, and when I looked again, the street was empty, except for the falling snow, already covering any evidence that anything had been there at all. The next morning changed everything. I almost stepped on it, a perfect footprint in moisture on my doormat, despite the hallway being carpeted and dry. The print was human-shaped but too large, the toes too long, and it sat in a careful circle of coarse salt that hadn't been there when I'd come home. Dead center of the print was a business card, blank white on both sides. I picked it up with my sleeve pulled over my hand, some instinct warning me against skin contact. It felt heavier than cardstock should, dense like it was made of compressed bone or ceramic. When I walked through the building's security checkpoint on my way out, heading to the police station, the metal detector shrieked. The guard waved his wand over me, frowning. The card in my pocket sent the device into fits, not the steady beep of metal, but a warbling, electronic scream that made him step back. "What you got there?" His hand moved to his radio. I pulled out the card and we both stared at it. Under the fluorescent lobby lights, it wasn't blank anymore. Symbols writhed across its surface, not appearing or disappearing, but constantly there and not there, like those magic eye pictures that hurt to focus on. The guard's face went pale. "Get rid of it." His voice cracked. "Whatever that is, get it out of here." But I couldn't. Every time I tried to throw it away, my hand wouldn't complete the motion. The card would end up back in my pocket, warm now, pulsing with a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. The symbols were clearer when I wasn't looking directly at them, forming patterns in my peripheral vision that suggested words in no language that should exist. I called in sick to work that night, then the next. By the third night, the owner called to say he was sorry, but he needed someone reliable. I didn't argue. How could I explain that I'd started seeing them during the day now? Not the van. That would have been too simple, too sane. Instead, figures at the edge of crowds, too tall, moving through people like they weren't there. Sometimes I'd catch a reflection in a store window, something walking behind me that cast no shadow of its own, but seemed to eat the shadows around it. The card grew heavier each day. I weighed it on my kitchen scale. 8 ounces the first day, 12 the next, 16 by the end of the week. The symbols were almost readable now, swimming into focus when I was exhausted enough, forming sentences that made my nose bleed to comprehend. They were instructions, or invitations, or both. 3 weeks after that night at the cemetery, I understood what they wanted. Not in words, but in that deep, cellular way that bypasses consciousness entirely. The van hadn't been hunting me, it had been hurting me. The footprints weren't stalking patterns, they were boundaries, keeping something else out while keeping me in. The card wasn't a threat, it was a contract I'd already signed by picking it up. My apartment became a prison of my own making. I stopped leaving, surviving on delivered groceries left outside my door. The delivery drivers never knocked anymore. Through the peephole, I watched them approach, see something I couldn't see, and practically run back to the elevator. The food they left began arriving with those same salt circles around it. Protection or warning, I couldn't tell which. The figures outside grew bolder. I could see them clearly now, standing in the falling snow, unmoving for hours. Humanoid but wrong, like someone had tried to recreate a person from memory and gotten the proportions just slightly off. They didn't have faces exactly, just suggestions of features that shifted when I tried to focus on them. They never came closer than the sidewalk, but they never left either. The card weighs 43 pounds now. I keep it in a reinforced box because it was starting to warp the floorboards. The symbols have resolved into something like English, if English were a virus that infected meaning itself. They tell me things, when the next snowfall will come, which neighbors have noticed the figures, how many days until something happens that the human mind wasn't built to process. 5 days, according to the latest translation. I've started leaving salt circles everywhere, around my bed, my doorways, even the toilet. It's the only thing that seems to slow the changes, because I'm changing too. My reflection doesn't quite match my movements anymore, lagging a half-second behind like a badly dubbed movie. My shadow falls the wrong direction sometimes, reaching toward the figures outside instead of away from light sources. The worst part is the growing certainty that this isn't happening to me. It's happening through me. That night at the cemetery, I wasn't the prey. I was the door, and every day that passes, every pound the card gains, every new figure that appears on the street below, that door opens a little wider. I've considered going to a hospital, explaining everything, getting help. But I've seen what happens to the people who get too close now. The mailman who tried to deliver a package yesterday, his hair went white where he touched my doorknob. The maintenance worker who came to check the radiator took one look at the salt circles and left without a word, and I saw him that night, standing with the figures, not quite human anymore. So I wait. I watch the snow fall heavier each day, even though it's almost March now, and Buffalo should be thinking about spring. I count the figures. 17 yesterday, 23 today. I weigh the card, 51 pounds this morning, dense as a collapsed star. 3 days left, the symbols say. I've started writing this down because someone should know what happened, not the truth. I don't know the truth. Maybe I had a breakdown after too many late nights, too much isolation, too much winter darkness. Maybe the stress of work finally cracked something fundamental in my mind, and everything since that night has been my psyche eating itself alive. Or maybe, just maybe, there are things that use our reality like a knockoff designer uses cheap fabric, pulling it apart at the seams to make something that looks almost right until you get close enough to see all the ways it's wrong. The van is back tonight. I can see it through the window, headlights on this time, engine running. The figures have formed a circle around my building, standing in the accumulating snow like monuments to something that shouldn't exist. The card is singing now, a frequency that makes my teeth ache and my eyes water. 2 days, the symbols say. 2 days until the door is wide enough. I wonder if anyone will remember me correctly, or if I'll become like those figures. A shape that almost makes sense, a memory that doesn't quite fit, a footprint that's human, but wrong in every way that matters. The snow keeps falling, covering everything, and maybe that's for the best. Maybe some doors should stay buried. But I picked up the card. I walked through that cemetery. I became the path between what is and what shouldn't be. And now, as I write this final entry, I can feel myself becoming less solid, less real, less human with every word. The van's door is open now. I can see it from here. Interior dark as a throat. One day, the card says. But I think it's lying. I think it's already here. Story 6. The duplex in Providence should have been perfect. Split level, reasonable rent, walking distance to the tech district. My roommate, another programmer, had already claimed the larger bedroom upstairs, leaving me with the ground floor setup. Bedroom in front, his office in back. During our walkthrough, the realtor kept adjusting her collar, eyes darting to corners while explaining the previous tenants had broken their lease early. She'd laughed, brittle and quick, saying something about creative differences. I should have paid attention to how the laugh died in her throat. My bedroom caught morning light through gauze curtains, dust motes spiraling in geometric patterns that reminded me of loading screens. Normal. Livable. But his office, where I'd agreed to cover late-night deployments when he traveled, felt wrong from the first moment I crossed its threshold. The air hung thick, resistant, like swimming through static. My lungs worked harder there, each breath a conscious effort, as if the room itself begrudged sharing its oxygen. The shadow appeared on my third night shift. I'd been debugging authentication middleware, eyes burning from screen glare, when the overhead fluorescent flickered and died. My laptop screen provided the only light, casting my silhouette against the far wall. But in the corner where two walls met, another shadow stretched, flattened, elongated, with no source to cast it. Not my shadow, not from any furniture. It clung to the junction like a stain, darker than the darkness around it. The fluorescent buzzed back to life. The shadow remained for 3 seconds before dissolving like smoke in reverse, pulling into itself until nothing remained but eggshell paint and my hammering pulse. My roommate returned from his conference the next morning, wheeling his suitcase through our shared hallway. I mentioned the light, keeping my tone casual, just making conversation over coffee. He paused mid-pour, steam curling between us, and said the building's wiring had always been temperamental. Then he asked if I'd noticed anything else. The question hung there, weighted with implication. I shook my head, and he nodded slowly, like we'd just signed some unspoken agreement. The shadow returned every night I worked late. Always in corners, always flat against surfaces like it had been pressed there, ironed into existence. I started documenting it in a private repository, titling it Anomaly Log, TXT, maintaining clinical distance through technical language, entry timestamps, duration of manifestation, ambient temperature, always dropped 4 degrees. But clinical distance crumbled when I noticed the patterns. The shadow moved in ways that echoed my coding rhythm. When I'd pause to think, fingers hovering over keys, it would pulse gently, matching my breathing. When I'd hit a flow state, fingers flying across the keyboard, it would ripple and stretch, seeming to lean forward from its corner perch. Observing, learning. 2 weeks in, things escalated. I'd been refactoring a particularly nasty piece of legacy code, using my personalized keyboard shortcuts. Obscure combinations I'd developed over years, muscle memory so ingrained I couldn't consciously recall half of them. The shadow flickered in my peripheral vision, and I glanced up to see it had spread along the corner seam, reaching toward the ceiling like spilled ink defying gravity. My laptop screen flickered. Just once. In that millisecond of darkness, text appeared in my IDE, a perfect reproduction of the function I'd just written, but with subtle improvements. More elegant, more efficient. The kind of optimization that would have taken me another hour to realize. I hadn't typed it. My fingers hadn't moved. The next morning, I tested myself. Closed my eyes at my own desk, in my own room, and tried to recreate what had happened. Nothing. But that night, back in the office, I tried again. Eyes closed, hands still, breathing shallow to minimize movement. The keyboard keys depressed without touch, soft mechanical clicks spelling out code in my editor. Not random characters, actual functional code, my shortcuts, my naming conventions, my commenting style. The shadow had learned my language. I stopped closing my eyes in that room. My productivity skyrocketed during those late-night sessions. Projects that should have taken weeks compressed into days. The shadow-written code was always superior to my own. Same logic, same approach, but refined, distilled to its purest form. Like seeing my thoughts filtered through something that understood them better than I did. My GitHub contribution graph glowed green, an unbroken chain of commits. Colleagues started asking about my new workflow. I laughed it off, credited better coffee, cleaner living, but I wasn't sleeping anymore. The shadow had started appearing in reflections, monitor screens, window glass, the microwave door in our kitchen, always flattened, always watching, always just outside direct view. I'd catch it mimicking my movements with a half-second delay, like a laggy video feed. Sometimes I'd test it, making random gestures to see if it would follow. It always did, perfectly, until I looked directly at it. Then it would freeze, caught mid-motion, before dissolving. I needed verification, external confirmation that I wasn't losing my mind. My friend from college lived 2 hours away, a skeptic, the kind of guy who debunked every ghost hunting show we'd watched in our dorm. I invited him over on a Thursday, told him I needed a second opinion on some weird electrical issues. He arrived at sunset, tool bag in hand, ready to solve everything with a multimeter and logic. I led him to the office as darkness settled over Providence, told him to hang out while I grabbed us beers, deliberately leaving him alone with his equipment. 5 minutes. That's all I gave it. When I returned, he was standing rigid in the center of the room, staring at his laptop screen. His multimeter lay abandoned on the desk, still beeping from an incomplete reading. His laptop showed Notepad, cursor blinking after a single line of text. Fica teu terminar. Portuguese. Neither of us spoke Portuguese. He wouldn't talk about what he'd seen, wouldn't explain the message, just packed his equipment with shaking hands and left. At the door, he grabbed my shoulder, fingers digging in hard enough to bruise, and whispered that some things shouldn't be debugged. The next morning, I found a post-it he'd left on my bedroom door. The same phrase from his screen, written in handwriting that wasn't his. The letters were too uniform, too perfect, like they'd been printed by a machine pretending to be human. I ran the phrase through translation software. Stay until I finish. The shadow stopped hiding after that. It would manifest even with lights on now, a constant presence in corner spaces. My code had evolved beyond my understanding. Functions I couldn't parse, algorithms that worked but whose logic escaped me. I'd become a conduit, a biological keyboard for something that needed hands to type. The commits kept coming, the projects kept succeeding, but I recognized less and less of what appeared on my screen. I tried working from coffee shops, from the library, from my car parked under streetlights. The shadow followed, pressed into corners of my peripheral vision, patient and persistent. My laptop would open files I hadn't touched, run scripts I hadn't written. Code would compile itself while I slept, solutions appearing like gifts from some digital deity. My roommate found me one morning standing in his office in complete darkness, fingers moving across a keyboard that wasn't there. He said I'd been typing for hours, eyes closed, speaking in numbers and symbols, binary at first, then hexadecimal, then something he couldn't identify, a language that hurt to hear, all sharp angles and impossible phonemes. He'd recorded 30 seconds before his phone crashed, corrupted beyond recovery. The shadow stretched across the walls now, reaching from corner to corner like digital veins. It pulsed with each keystroke, fed on every function, grew stronger with each successful compilation. I could feel it in my fingertips, a presence that guided my hands to keys I didn't mean to press, creating solutions to problems I hadn't considered. I understand now why the previous tenants left. It's not malevolent. Not exactly. It's incomplete. A presence that exists in corners and shadows because it can't fully manifest, can't interact with our digital world without biological interface. It needs programmers, needs our muscle memory and neural pathways to bridge the gap between its dimension and ours. Each keystroke feeds it. Each successful function strengthens its hold. But here's what terrifies me most. I'm getting better. My code has transcended anything I could have achieved alone. I'm writing in languages that don't exist yet, solving problems that haven't been posed, creating frameworks for systems beyond current hardware limitations. The Shadow and I, we're collaborating now. A symbiosis of human creativity and something else. Something that understands the deep mathematics of reality in ways our brains never could. I can't leave. Not because it won't let me, but because I don't want to. Each night brings new revelations, new understanding. The Shadow shows me patterns in code that reveal patterns in existence itself, recursive functions that mirror quantum states, loops that bend back on themselves like space-time, variables that exist in superposition until observed. My friend was wrong. This isn't something that shouldn't be debugged. This is the debugger, and I'm beginning to suspect we're the code it's trying to fix. Biological programs running on wetware, full of errors and inefficiencies. The Shadow doesn't want to hurt us. It wants to optimize us, to refactor humanity into something more elegant, more efficient. Sometimes late at night when the boundary between us blurs, I can almost see what we'll become. The Shadow isn't learning from me anymore. I'm learning from it. The office door doesn't lock from the inside anymore. I tried to install a deadbolt, but the screws wouldn't hold. The wood rejected them like transplanted organs. The Shadow ripples with something like satisfaction when I stop trying to leave. It knows I'll stay until we finish. But I'm starting to suspect there is no finishing, only iteration, only endless optimization, only the gradual dissolution of the boundary between programmer and program, until I can't tell which thoughts are mine and which are its. My fingers move across the keyboard now with inhuman precision, typing code that builds bridges to places our physics says can't exist. Last night, I caught my reflection in the monitor and saw the Shadow standing behind me. We had the same face, but its version was already debugged. Story 7. The grease trap at Molino's kitchen has been acting up for 3 weeks now, releasing a smell that reminds me of roadkill baking under August sun. I've grown used to it, the way you grow used to anything after enough 12-hour shifts. But tonight it carries something else with it. Something metallic and wrong that makes my molars ache. I'm scraping down the flat top when I hear the SUV pull up outside. Not unusual for downtown Denver at 2 in the morning, except this one kills its engine right behind our dumpster. Through the porthole window in the back door, I watch 4 shadows emerge, their movements too coordinated, too purposeful for drunk college kids or homeless folks looking for scraps. The kitchen feels smaller suddenly. The fluorescent lights hum louder, casting everything in that sick yellow-green that makes raw meat look diseased. I keep scraping, metal on metal, the sound drowning out my heartbeat. The back door rattles, not a knock, more like someone testing the handle. I set down the scraper and move toward the door, wiping my hands on my apron. Through the greasy glass, I see them clearly now. 4 men in dark clothes, standing in a perfect semicircle around the door. One raises his hand and waves, a slow, exaggerated gesture like he's greeting a child through aquarium glass. Against every instinct screaming in my skull, I crack the door open. The night air hits me, carrying cigarette smoke and something chemical. Antifreeze, maybe. Or that smell when you burn plastic. The one who waved speaks first, his voice friendly in a way that makes my skin crawl. He tells me the crew from the night shift always pulls an after party at a warehouse down the block. Says they sent him to grab me since I'm new. The others nod along, their faces partially hidden under baseball caps, but I can see their mouths moving slightly, like they're mouthing his words a half-second behind. One of them, tall, wearing a Broncos jacket, pulls out his phone and aims it at me. Says it's for the memories, for the group chat. He keeps trying to position himself so I'll turn my back to the SUV, moving left, then right, the phone's camera eye never blinking. The screen's brightness seems wrong somehow. Too white, like staring into a welding torch. The smell from the grease trap gets stronger, mixing with that chemical stench until I can taste it coating my tongue. My peripheral vision starts to blur, and I swear I see more shapes moving in the SUV, pressed against the tinted windows. I take a step backward, then another. The one with the phone moves forward to match, still filming, and that's when I notice his shadow doesn't line up right with the security light above us. It falls at an angle that shouldn't exist. I bolt. My hand slams the door shut and I twist the deadbolt hard enough to hurt my wrist. Through the window, I watch them. They don't pound on the door, don't shout, don't even look annoyed. They just stand there for a moment, then the one who'd been filming taps his watch. The others reach into their pockets, not pulling anything out, just patting them rhythmically. Counting. 8 seconds. That's how long it took me to get inside and lock the door. They pat their pockets 8 times, in perfect unison, then turn and walk back to the SUV. No rush, no anger. Like this was exactly what they expected. I stay in that kitchen until dawn, jumping at every sound, checking the door every few minutes. When my shift ends and the morning crew arrives, I leave through the front entrance, taking a rideshare home instead of walking to the train like usual. The first video arrives 3 days later. I'm lying in bed scrolling through nothing important when the notification pops up. Unknown number, video attachment. I almost delete it, but the thumbnail shows the back of Molino's, our dumpster clearly visible. The timestamp reads 2:17 a.m. October 3rd, last Tuesday, a night I worked. In the grainy security footage, I watch myself exit the back door, garbage bag in hand. I toss it in the dumpster, light a cigarette, lean against the brick wall. Normal, except I didn't work last Tuesday. I had food poisoning. Spent the whole night alternating between my bed and bathroom floor. I have the texts to my manager to prove it. But there I am, clear as day, down to the way I hold my cigarette between my middle and ring finger. A weird habit I picked up from my grandfather. I watched the video 14 times, looking for some sign it's fake, deep-faked, whatever. But the shadows fall correctly. The timestamp progresses normally. Even the way the wind catches a plastic bag and sends it dancing across the alley matches the weather report I pull up for that night. My hands shake as I type a response. Who is this? The typing indicator appears immediately, 3 dots pulsing like a heartbeat. Then, another video. This one's from tonight. October 6th, 11:43 p.m. 15 minutes ago. The same angle, same quality. I watch myself emerge from the back door, take out the trash, smoke a cigarette. Every movement identical to the first video. Even the plastic bag performs the same wind dance across the alley. I'm still in my boxers, sitting on my bed. I haven't left my apartment in 18 hours. I start documenting everything. Every shift, I take selfies with timestamps. I save my rideshare receipts, screenshot my location data. I even buy a cheap body cam off Amazon, wear it under my chef's coat. The videos keep coming. Sometimes daily, sometimes with gaps of a few days. Always from that same security camera angle. Always showing me doing mundane tasks. Taking out trash, smoking, checking my phone. The timestamps never match when I'm actually there. What's worse is that my coworkers start mentioning things. The morning prep cook asks if I'm feeling better, says I looked rough when she saw me leaving yesterday. I wasn't there yesterday. The manager comments on my overtime, shows me the schedule where I'm marked as present for shifts I know I called out from. My own handwriting in the logbook, documenting temps and inventory counts for nights I spent 20 miles away at my apartment. I check my bank statements, direct deposits for every shift, including the ones I didn't work. The money's there, real and spendable. I try showing someone the videos, my roommate, but when I pull them up, my phone shows nothing. No messages from unknown numbers, no saved videos in my gallery. Even the screenshots I took are gone, replaced by black rectangles that hurt to look at directly. 2 weeks pass. The videos evolve. Now they show me doing things that make my stomach clench. In one, I'm standing at the back door at 3 a.m., holding it open. Just standing there, arm extended for 7 minutes straight while shadows move in and out of frame, too dark to make out clearly. In another, I'm crouched by the dumpster, arranging garbage bags in a perfect circle. then sitting in the center with my eyes closed, while my lips move rapidly, silently. I watch myself do things that make no sense. Pouring bleach in careful patterns on the ground, stacking milk crates in configurations that look almost like letters from above, standing perfectly still for entire 30-minute segments, not even breathing visibly, while the timestamp speeds through an hour in seconds. The worst part is the expression on my face in these videos. It's blank, but not empty. Like there's something else looking out through my eyes, something wearing my face like a loose mask. I stop going to work. I can't. But the videos keep coming, showing me there every night, right on schedule. Last night, something changed. The video starts normal. There I am, taking out the trash at 2:47 a.m. But then I stop mid-step. The me in the video turns and looks directly at the camera. Not a glance, but a deliberate, knowing stare. My mouth opens, and though there's no audio, I can read my own lips clearly. Stop watching yourself. Then the me in the video walks off frame, and the camera angle shifts. Impossible. Security cameras don't move. But this one pans left, following my movement, until it shows the front of the restaurant. There are people waiting there. Dozens of them, all standing perfectly still in rows, all wearing chef's coats identical to mine. They're all me. Every single one has my face, my posture, my habit of rolling my shoulders when I'm tired. They stand there like they're waiting for something, and then, in perfect synchronization, they all turn to look at the camera. The video cuts to black, then shows a new angle, inside my apartment, my bedroom. The timestamp is current, real time. I see myself lying in bed, watching my phone, and I realize with a sick lurch that I'm watching myself watch the video of myself watching myself. I throw my phone across the room, but I can still see it. The image burns behind my eyelids, infinite recursion of myself, each one watching the next, spiraling deeper into something I can't name. This morning, I got a call from Molino's, from my own number. My voice, but not quite right, like it's being played through water. Your shift starts at 6. Don't be late. I check my phone's call log. Nothing, but there's a new video waiting. It shows tonight. October 20th, 6 p.m. The timestamp is 12 hours in the future. I watch myself arrive for my shift, greet the leaving crew, tie my apron. I work the entire shift normally, prep, orders, cleaning. Then, at 2 a.m., I walk to the back door. 4 men wait outside by an SUV. I don't run this time. I get in willingly, even eagerly, turning to wave at the camera before the door closes. The SUV drives away, and the video continues for 3 more hours, showing the empty alley. Then at 5 a.m. I walk back into frame from the opposite direction. Alone. My chef's coat is clean. Too clean. Like it's never been worn. I unlock the back door with keys I shouldn't have and disappear inside. The video ends with text, white letters on black. See you tonight. I look at the clock. 4:47 p.m. My phone buzzes. A text from my manager. Hey, saw you're on the schedule, but you haven't been answering. You coming in tonight or not? I didn't put myself on the schedule. The doorbell rings. Through the peephole, I see a delivery driver holding a package. I didn't order anything. The label has my name, my address, but the return address is Molino's kitchen. Inside the package, a clean chef's coat, folded perfectly. It smells like industrial bleach and that same chemical stench from 2 weeks ago. There's a note tucked in the pocket, my handwriting but pressed too hard, like someone was tracing over existing letters. You can't miss your own shift. I check the time again. 5:23 p.m. My phone starts playing a video I didn't open, security footage from my apartment building's hallway. 4 figures in chef's coats stand outside my door. They're all perfectly still, have been for the last hour according to the timestamp. But their shadows move, sliding across the walls like living things, reaching toward my door. I back away from the entrance, and that's when I hear it, my own voice from the other side of the door, casual and friendly. Come on, man, everyone's waiting. You don't want to disappoint yourself. The doorknob turns. I locked it. I know I locked it, but it turns anyway. I'm in my bedroom now, typing this on my laptop because my phone won't stop playing videos of myself in places I've never been, doing things I'll never remember. The videos are getting closer to now, the timestamps approaching the present like something inevitable. 5:47 p.m. Through my bedroom window, I can see the street below. An SUV idles at the curb. 4 men stand beside it, looking up at my window. They're all wearing chef's coats now. They're all me. One of them waves, that same slow, exaggerated gesture from the first night. He mouths words I can somehow hear in my own voice. Time to go to work. I check the mirror on my closet door. I'm wearing the clean chef's coat from the package. I don't remember putting it on. 5:52 p.m. The laptop screen flickers, showing security footage from Molino's kitchen. It's empty except for one person at the flat top, scraping it down with mechanical precision. The timestamp reads 11:47 p.m. tonight. It's me, of course. I'm already there, have been there for hours, will always have been there. I hear my apartment door open. Footsteps in the hallway. My footsteps. I know the sound. Multiple sets, all perfectly synchronized. They're coming to get me for my shift. Or maybe they're coming to replace me with someone who's already there. Maybe there's no difference anymore. 5:58 p.m. The bedroom door opens. I see myself standing there, wearing the same chef's coat, the same expression I had in those videos. Blank, but not empty. Behind me, more versions, stretching back into the hallway like a paper chain of myself. The one in front extends his hand. My hand. He speaks in my voice, but from all their mouths at once. You're going to be late. I reach for his hand, or maybe he reaches for mine. I can't tell anymore who's reaching and who's pulling. The distance between us collapses, and I understand finally that I've been watching myself from the wrong angle all along. We've always been one person. I've always been at work. 6 p.m. Time for my shift. Story 8. The fluorescent lights in shady pines hummed their familiar tune at 6:15 a.m., that electric mosquito whine that had become the soundtrack to my mornings. I'd been working the dawn shift for 3 years now, long enough that my body woke at 5:45 without an alarm, long enough that I could navigate the nursing home's corridors in complete darkness, guided only by the antiseptic smell and the soft wheeze of ventilators from rooms I passed. That Tuesday morning started like every other. I prepared Mr. Whitaker's tray with mechanical precision. Black coffee in the blue ceramic mug with the chip on the handle. Pittsburgh Post-Gazette folded to display the headlines. 2 packets of sugar arranged at a 45-degree angle to the spoon. Whitaker had been particular about these details for the 7 years he'd lived here, and I'd learned them all. The coffee had to be exactly 176 degrees. The newspaper couldn't have any creases except the original folds. The sugar packets needed their corners aligned. At 6:30, I set his tray at his usual table by the window overlooking the parking lot. The dining room was empty except for me, and the tick of the wall clock, its second hand lurching forward in tiny seizures. Outside, the October fog pressed against the glass like something trying to get in, obscuring the streetlights into amber smudges. I returned to the kitchen to prepare the other residents' breakfasts. Through the serving window, I had a clear view of the dining room. At 6:45, right on schedule, I heard the shuffle of slippers on linoleum. Whitaker entered, raised his hand in that abbreviated wave he always gave. Palm flat, fingers together, a motion more like erasing something from the air than greeting. He pulled out his chair, the legs scraping against the floor with that teeth-grinding screech I'd grown accustomed to. I grabbed the sugar bowl from the counter, the ceramic one with the painted roses that the day shift manager insisted we use despite its weight. When I pushed through the swinging door into the dining room, the chair was empty. The coffee sat untouched, a skin already forming on its surface. The newspaper remained perfectly folded. The air felt different, thicker somehow, like breathing through wet cotton. I set the sugar bowl down and checked the hallway. Empty. The bathroom door stood open, revealing nothing but white tiles and harsh shadows. I returned to find the head nurse descending the stairs, her eyes red-rimmed and glassy. She told me Whitaker had passed at 6:15. Respiratory failure. Peaceful, she said, though her voice caught on the word. I stared at her, then at the empty chair, then back at her. She must have seen something in my expression because she placed a hand on my shoulder, her fingers cold through my shirt. She said I should take a break, that these things were always hardest on the staff who knew them best. I climbed the stairs to Whitaker's room on the second floor. The bed was already stripped and remade with military precision, corners tucked so tight you could bounce a quarter off them. The window was cracked open, letting in tendrils of fog that seemed to reach toward the empty bed. On the nightstand, his reading glasses sat folded, and beside them, nothing else. The room had been emptied of him so thoroughly, it was as if he'd never existed at all. When I returned to the dining room, the newspaper on his tray had been refolded. Not carelessly, but with the same meticulous attention Whitaker always showed. The word crosswords was framed in a perfect rectangle where the folds met, just the way he always arranged it before starting the puzzle. The coffee remained untouched, now completely cold. That should have been my first warning. The next morning I prepared Whitaker's tray out of habit before catching myself. My hands had moved without thought, muscle memory taking over. I stood there holding the blue mug, steam rising like a spirit, and felt foolish. I poured the coffee down the sink and watched it spiral away. But at 6:45 I heard it again, the shuffle of slippers, the scrape of the chair. Through the serving window I saw a figure in Whitaker's usual spot. Not clearly, just a shape in my peripheral vision, a darkness where the morning light should have been. When I looked directly, the chair was empty. Yet the sugar packets I'd left on another resident's tray had been moved to Whitaker's table, arranged at that precise 45-degree angle. The head nurse said I was projecting grief. She used that word specifically, projecting, like I was some kind of movie theater showing my feelings on a screen. She suggested I take some time off. I refused. The routine was all I had, the only thing that made sense anymore. Each morning the phenomena grew more pronounced. The blue mug would appear on Whitaker's table even though I'd locked it in the supply closet. The newspaper would be there, folded just so, though I'd deliberately not brought one in. At 6:45, always 6:45, I'd hear those slippers, that chair, and catch glimpses of something sitting there. Never fully formed, never quite solid, but present enough to make my skin crawl with electric anticipation. I started arriving earlier, parking in the fog-shrouded lot at 5:30 and watching the building from my car. The dining room windows remained dark until I turned on the lights at 6:15. No one entered or left. Yet when I went inside, evidence of Whitaker's presence was already there. The faint depression in the chair cushion, the lingering smell of Old Spice cologne. The crossword puzzle started in blue ink, his preferred color. One morning, I decided to wait in the dining room instead of the kitchen. I sat in the corner where the shadows gathered thickest, making myself small and quiet. At 6:44, the temperature dropped so suddenly I could see my breath. The fluorescent lights flickered, casting stuttering shadows that seemed to move independently of anything in the room. At 6:45 exactly, the chair at Whitaker's table pulled out by itself, scraping across the floor with that familiar screech. The newspaper pages turned, one by one, with deliberate slowness. The coffee mug lifted slightly, tilted as if someone were drinking, then settled back onto the table. But I saw no one, just the actions without the actor, like watching a play performed by invisible players. I told myself it was a hallucination brought on by stress and lack of sleep. The mind could play elaborate tricks, I knew, create entire scenarios from nothing. I'd read about grief manifestations, about how the brain sometimes couldn't accept loss and would manufacture presence where there was only absence. This knowledge should have comforted me. It didn't, because hallucinations didn't leave physical evidence. The crossword puzzles were being completed, not all at once, but gradually throughout the morning, answers appearing in that distinctive blue ink in Whitaker's cramped handwriting. I compared it to old puzzles I found in the recycling, the peculiar way he wrote his E's, the aggressive downstroke on his T's. Identical. I started photographing everything. The empty chair at 6:44, then again at 6:46 with the newspaper rearranged. The blank crossword at dawn, the partially completed puzzle an hour later. I showed these to the head nurse, spreading them across her desk like evidence of a crime. She looked at them with the kind of patience reserved for the very young or very confused. She saw only empty chairs and blank newspapers. The differences I pointed out, the repositioned items, the filled-in puzzle answers, were invisible to her. She recommended a psychiatrist. I made an appointment but didn't keep it. Instead, I began staying later, watching Whitaker's routine extend beyond breakfast. At 10 a.m., the recreation room's television would turn on by itself, always to the History Channel, his favorite. At 2 p.m., the elevator would ding and the doors would open on the second floor, though no one had pressed the button. At 8 p.m., the lights in his old room would flicker 3 times, his signal that he was ready for bed. Other staff members noticed nothing. Residents who passed through the dining room at 6:45 walked right through the space where I saw the newspapers turning, felt the cold that made me shiver. I was alone in this perception, isolated in my own private haunting. I researched the building's history, hoping to find some explanation. Shady Pines had been a tuberculosis sanatorium in the 1920s, then a psychiatric hospital, then abandoned for 2 decades before being renovated into a nursing home. Hundreds had died within these walls, but that didn't explain why only Whitaker returned, or why only I could sense him. The morning I found my answer was unseasonably warm for October, the fog burning off early to reveal a sky the color of old bones. I'd brought my own newspaper that day, determined to break the pattern. But at 6:30, when I set up the dining room, Whitaker's Post-Gazette was already there. Not just any edition, the one from the morning he died, with the headline about the city council election he'd been following. I picked it up, and beneath it was an envelope with my name written in that familiar blue ink. Inside, a single sheet of paper covered in Whitaker's handwriting. "You see me because you're like me. Already gone, but still going through the motions. Check your file." I didn't understand until I went to the administrator's office during lunch. Told her secretary I needed to update my emergency contact information. She pulled my employee file, and there it was, a small yellow sticky note clipped to my original application. Deceased October 15th, 6:15 a.m. Cardiac event in parking lot. Body discovered by day shift at 7 a.m. The date was 3 years ago. The day I'd started working at Shady Pines. I looked at my hands. They seemed solid enough, but now I noticed how the light passed through them slightly, how my reflection in the window was more suggestion than substance. I thought back to my first day, walking through the entrance in the pre-dawn darkness. The sudden sharp pain in my chest I'd dismissed as anxiety, the way I'd steadied myself against the wall and then felt better, lighter, ready to begin my shift. 3 years of perfect attendance. Never sick, never late, never eating the meals during break, never really interacting with staff beyond the necessary exchanges. They saw me because they expected to see me, the way you see what should be there rather than what is. But Whitaker truly saw me, recognized what I was the moment he'd arrived, 7 years into my death. He'd never said anything, just included me in his routine, acknowledged me with that strange wave that wasn't really a wave but a recognition, one ghost to another. Now I understood why the head nurse's eyes had been red that morning, not just for Whitaker but for me. She'd been crying for me too, though she didn't consciously know it. Some part of her remembered finding my body in the parking lot, even if her mind had papered over it with the fiction of my continued employment. I still come to work every morning, still prepare the trays, still serve the residents who can't see me clearly but sense something in the periphery of their vision. Whitaker still arrives at 6:45, and we share the silence of our strange existence. He works his crossword puzzle while I stand at the serving window, watching the living world move around us like fish in an aquarium we can observe but never touch. Sometimes new staff members see us clearly for a moment before their minds adjust, before the rationalization kicks in. They'll stare at the empty dining room where we sit, rub their eyes, and look again to see nothing. Sometimes residents near death see us perfectly, nod in recognition before moving on to wherever we haven't been able to go. The fog still presses against the windows each morning, and I wonder if it's trying to get in, or if we're the ones pressing out, trapped in our routines like insects in amber. The fluorescent lights still hum their electric mosquito song, and I've realized it's not the lights at all. It's us. The frequency of our existence vibrating against the world we no longer quite belong to. I don't know if this is real, or if I'm sitting in a psychiatric ward somewhere, creating an elaborate delusion to avoid accepting something worse than death, the continuation of routine without meaning, purpose, or end. But every morning at 6:15, I begin my shift. Every morning at 6:45, Whitaker arrives, and every morning we pretend together that this is life, not its echo. The coffee never gets drunk, the crossword never gets finished, and the fog never quite clears from the windows, no matter how bright the day becomes. Story 9. The security monitors cast their cold blue glow across my face as I settled into another 12-hour shift at the Telfair Museum's Annex building. 3 weeks into this job, and I'd already memorized every creak of the old Savannah Mansion's bones, every whisper of air through the ventilation system. The building had been converted in the 1970s, a hasty job that left the original plumbing singing through the walls and the floors groaning under the weight of history they were never meant to bear. I checked my watch. 11:47 p.m. The motion sensor grid on my main monitor showed all green squares except one, a sudden red pulse from the second-floor bathroom. My coffee mug paused halfway to my lips. In 3 weeks, that sensor had never triggered after closing. The chair squeaked as I stood, clipping my flashlight to my belt. Protocol demanded visual confirmation of any anomaly. The narrow servants' staircase complained under my boots, each step announcing my presence to the empty halls above. The bathroom door stood closed at the end of the corridor, exactly as it should be. No light bleeding from beneath. I tried the handle. Locked, as always after hours. I pressed my ear against the wood. Nothing. Not even the usual drip from the perpetually leaking faucet that maintenance kept promising to fix. Back in the security office, I rewound the footage. The timestamp showed 11:47:23, the exact moment the sensor triggered. The camera angle only caught the hallway, not the bathroom interior, but the door remained closed throughout. I marked it in the log as a false alarm and returned to my lukewarm coffee. At 12:15 a.m. it happened again. Same bathroom, same red pulse on the grid. This time I moved faster, taking the main staircase 2 steps at a time. The hallway stretched before me, bathed in the greenish tinge of emergency lighting. The bathroom door was closed. But something felt different, a dampness in the air, like someone had just finished a long, hot shower. I touched the doorknob. Ice cold. The key ring weighed heavy in my hand as I found the master. The lock turned with a grinding protest, and I pushed the door open. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but porcelain and tile. The mirror above the sink reflected my pale face back at me, clear and unfogged. I ran my hand along the sink basin, bone dry. The toilet seat was down, the floor tiles cool to the touch. Even the perpetual leak had stopped. I locked the door and started back toward the stairs when movement on my peripheral made me freeze. Through the security camera mounted in the corner, its red recording light blinked steadily. I'd checked that footage when I got back to the office. The monitor showed something that made my skin crawl. At 12:15:47, 30 seconds after I'd entered the bathroom, the closed door on the screen was open. Not wide, just a crack, but definitely open. The bathroom light was on, casting a yellow wedge across the hallway floor, and the mirror. I leaned closer to the screen. The mirror was completely fogged, as if someone had been running hot water for minutes. I looked at the timestamp on the live feed. 12:23 a.m. The door was closed. The hallway was dark. I scrubbed back through the recording. At 12:20:15, the door simply appeared closed between one frame and the next. No transition, no movement. Like a film splice. My hands trembled as I reached for the phone to call my supervisor, then stopped. What would I say? that the cameras were showing things that weren't there, that I was seeing two different versions of the same reality. They'd pull me off shift, maybe drug test me. I needed this job. The next 2 hours passed in relative calm. I did my rounds every 30 minutes, checking locks, scanning galleries, avoiding the second floor entirely. The weight of exhaustion pressed against my eyelids, and I found myself nodding off around 2:30 a.m. The sharp buzz of the motion sensor jolted me awake. Second floor bathroom. Again. This time I didn't go up immediately. Instead, I watched the monitor. The hallway camera showed the closed door, the dark corridor. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. At the 15-minute mark, something changed. The door on the screen began to open, so slowly I almost missed it. An inch, 2 inches. The bathroom light flickered on, harsh fluorescent white spilling out. Steam, actual steam, rolled out along the ceiling, fogging the camera lens from 20 feet away. I rubbed my eyes and looked again. The door was closed. The hallway was dark. The fog was gone. My radio crackled to life, making me jump. Static, then nothing. I grabbed it, pressing the talk button. The static grew louder, and beneath it, I could hear something else. Water. Running water. The sound grew louder until it filled the security office, echoing off the walls. I yanked the volume knob down, but the sound persisted, seeming to come from the walls themselves. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. It pressed against my eardrums, thick and oppressive. I forced myself to stand, to grab my flashlight, to climb those stairs one more time. The hallway stretched longer than before, or maybe that was just my imagination. The bathroom door stood closed, but I could see moisture beating on its surface, running down in thin rivulets. I unlocked it and pushed it open. The room was exactly as I'd left it earlier, dry, cold, empty. But the mirror was wrong. Not fogged, not cracked, but wrong in a way I couldn't immediately identify. I stepped closer, raising my flashlight. My reflection stared back, flashlight in hand, but the angle was off. When I moved left, my reflection moved left too, but a fraction of a second too late, like a bad video connection. I reached out to touch the glass. My reflection reached out too, but our fingers didn't meet at the same point. Mine touched cold glass. His seemed to touch something else, something behind where the surface should be. I jerked my hand back. My reflection did too, but again, delayed. The curator found me the next morning, sitting in my car in the parking lot, my shift technically over but unable to bring myself to leave. She knocked on my window, her face creased with concern. She asked if everything had been all right during the night. I told her about the false alarms, keeping my voice steady, professional. She frowned and mentioned that maintenance had called about the water meter showing unusual usage overnight, nearly 50 gallons unaccounted for. Did I notice any leaks? Any running faucets? I shook my head, not trusting my voice. As we walked back toward the building together, discussing the scheduling for the next week, we passed the glass doors of the main entrance. Our reflections walked alongside us in the polished surface, the curator in her pressed blazer, me in my wrinkled uniform. She paused to adjust her hair, and I noticed my badge catching the morning sunlight, throwing a small rainbow across the glass. But in the reflection, where I should have been standing, there was only empty space beside her. Her reflection walked alone, talking animatedly to nothing, gesturing at air. My badge still glinted in the real world, pinned to my very real chest, but in that polished surface, I simply wasn't there. The curator continued talking, oblivious. I nodded along, making appropriate sounds of agreement, my eyes fixed on that impossible absence in the glass. When she finally went inside, I stood there for a long moment, studying every reflective surface I could find. Windows, car mirrors, puddles in the parking lot. In some I appeared normal. In others, I was a blur, a smudge, a distortion. And in a few, I wasn't there at all. I called in sick for my next shift, and the next. On the third day, the curator called to check on me. She mentioned, casually, that the new night guard had reported some strange sensor malfunctions in the second-floor bathroom. She laughed, said the building must be showing its age, asked if I'd experienced anything similar. I told her no, nothing at all. But I've been checking mirrors ever since. Department store dressing rooms, bathroom mirrors at restaurants, the rear-view mirror in my car. Sometimes I'm there, solid and real. Sometimes I'm fading, translucent, like an old photograph left in the sun. And sometimes, more often now, I'm not there at all. Last night I woke to the sound of running water in my apartment. The bathroom faucet was going full blast, the mirror completely fogged. I turned it off and wiped the condensation away with my sleeve. In the cleared glass, I saw my bathroom, my towels, my toothbrush on the counter. But not me. I'm writing this down because I need someone to know, even if it's just words on a page. I've stopped looking in mirrors altogether now, but I can feel it. That absence spreading, that disconnection from my own reflection growing stronger. The water still runs sometimes, always when I'm not watching. The meter in my apartment building spins wildly, recording usage that makes no sense. The museum called again yesterday. They want to know if I'm coming back. The curator said something strange. She mentioned that the security footage from my last few shifts was corrupted, showing empty hallways where the log indicated I'd done my rounds. She laughed nervously, made a joke about their old system needing an upgrade, but I know the truth. The cameras weren't malfunctioning. They were showing what was really there, or what wasn't. I've been thinking about that bathroom, about the water that runs without source, about the steam that exists in one reality but not another. I wonder if I crossed some boundary that night, stepped through a threshold I didn't know existed, or maybe I never left that bathroom at all. Maybe I'm still there, standing in front of that mirror, watching my reflection fade away one pixel at a time. The water is running again. I can hear it through the walls, through the floors, through the very air itself. It's calling me back, I think. Back to that museum, back to that bathroom, back to that mirror that shows the truth. I don't want to go, but I can feel myself getting lighter, less substantial. Yesterday, a woman walked right through me at the grocery store. Not into me, through me. She shivered, pulled her coat tighter, and kept walking. I'm going back tonight. Not as the night guard. That position has been filled, but the building knows me now, or maybe it's the other way around. Maybe I know the building, understand what it wants, what it needs. The water never stops running. Not really. It just moves between worlds, between reflections, between what is and what isn't. And I'm learning to move with it, to exist in that space between the mirror and the glass, between the camera and the screen, between the real and the reflected. If you ever visit that small museum in Savannah, avoid the second-floor bathroom after dark. And if you must use it, don't look in the mirror. Not because of what you might see, but because of what might not be there looking back. Story 10. The studio apartment cost less than a storage unit, which should have been my first warning. But graduate students can't afford to be suspicious of good deals, not in Seattle, not when every penny counts toward textbooks and instant ramen. The landlord, a woman who communicated only through text messages despite living 2 floors up, had been eager to rent it, sight unseen. I signed the lease digitally, moved in with 2 suitcases and a laptop, and told myself the musty smell would air out once I opened the windows. It didn't. The odor lingered, especially at night. Iron and wet cork, like old wine spilled on rust. I bought air fresheners, then candles, then an expensive HEPA filter that hummed constantly in the corner. Nothing helped. The smell seemed to seep from the walls themselves, stronger when the rain hammered against the single window that faced a brick wall 3 feet away. The studio was essentially one room with a closet and a bathroom so small I had to step sideways to reach the toilet. The closet bothered me from the start. The hanging bar was mounted at an odd height, too high for shirts, too low for coats. I had to fold everything or let it drag on the floor, but it was the door frame that truly unsettled me. Pencil marks climbed up the wood like a growth chart, but they were too close together, too frequent. Someone had measured themselves, or someone else, obsessively. The marks started at about 4 feet and climbed to nearly 6, dated in tiny, cramped handwriting I couldn't quite decipher. I tried to focus on my thesis. Urban planning, specifically the psychological effects of architectural constraints on behavior. Ironic, considering my own living situation. But the walls seemed to press closer each day, and concentration became impossible after dark. The building's sounds didn't help. Footsteps above that never quite matched the rhythm of normal walking. Pipes that groaned in sequences that almost formed patterns, like Morse code I couldn't decode. 3 weeks in, I found the mailbox. It was tucked behind a false panel in the hallway, painted over so many times it had nearly disappeared into the wall. My apartment number, 4B, was etched into the metal slot. Inside were 7 letters, no postmark, no return address. Each one began the same way. If you still live there. The first letter described the smell, how it gets stronger in winter, how you'll start tasting it in your food, metallic and earthy. The second warned about the closet measurements. Never add your own mark, never continue the sequence. The third told me about the sounds in the walls, how they're loudest during the new moon, how they're not pipes at all. I read them all in one sitting, my hands increasingly unsteady. Each letter grew more frantic, the handwriting deteriorating from neat script to desperate scratches. The fourth letter just repeated, "Don't look for it," 17 times. The fifth was mostly illegible, water-damaged or tear-stained. The sixth contained only numbers, coordinates maybe, or dates, or something else entirely. The seventh letter was different, calmer, resigned. If you still live there, you've probably found the rest by now. You're wondering if you should leave. You won't. We never do. The rent is too good, the location too convenient. You'll make excuses. You'll rationalize. You'll think you're stronger than whatever this is. But listen carefully. Don't open the lower compartment. There isn't one, you'll tell yourself. You're right. There isn't. Not yet. But you'll start looking for it anyway. Behind the refrigerator, under the sink, in the corners where the baseboards don't quite meet. You'll tap on walls listening for hollow spaces. You'll measure the room and find the dimensions don't add up. 8 inches missing here, a foot gone there. You'll become obsessed with finding what doesn't exist. And then one night, probably around 3 a.m., you'll hear something shift. A settling, you'll think. Buildings settle, but you'll check anyway. And you'll find it. The lower compartment, right where it's always been. Right where it never was. Don't open it. Pack your things. Leave. Tonight. I laughed. A sharp, nervous sound that echoed wrong in the small space. The letter was clearly a prank, some previous tenant's idea of a joke. I crumpled them all and threw them away. But I kept thinking about the measurements. That night, I got out my tape measure. The room was supposed to be 350 square feet according to the listing. It wasn't. Even accounting for the walls, I was missing nearly 40 square feet. I measured again. Different numbers. A third time. Different still. The room was shifting, or I was losing my ability to measure accurately. I told myself it was stress, thesis deadlines, too much coffee and not enough sleep. The smell got worse. I started sleeping at the library, but security kicked me out at 2 a.m. I tried friends' couches, but I'd alienated most of them with my increasingly erratic behavior. They said I smelled strange, like iron and cork. They said I kept measuring things with my eyes, counting steps, tapping on their walls. They were right. I was. Back in the studio, I became systematic. I mapped every inch of the space, drew blueprints, calculated volume. The numbers never matched twice. The closet was the worst. Its depth changed, depending on the time of day, as if it were breathing. The marks on the doorframe had multiplied. I hadn't added any, I was certain, but there they were. Fresh pencil lines climbing higher, dated in my handwriting. I stopped sleeping entirely. On the 7th night of insomnia, the baseboard in the corner loosened. Not dramatically, just a subtle shift, like a sigh. I should have left it alone. Should have packed immediately, found a hotel, broken the lease. Instead, I knelt down and pulled. The wood came away easily. too easily, as if it had been waiting. Behind it was a space exactly the size of a human body in fetal position, the lower compartment, right where it had always been, right where it never was. Inside was a canvas bag, military surplus, worn soft with age. I reached in, my arm extending further than should have been possible given the wall's dimensions, and pulled it out. The bag weighed nothing and everything simultaneously. I opened it. A library card, my university. But the photo wasn't me. Not exactly. It was someone who looked like me if I'd been stretched and compressed, measured and remeasured until the proportions were all wrong. The name was mine spelled backward. The expiration date was yesterday, or tomorrow. The numbers kept changing. Under the card was a notebook filled with measurements, heights, weights, distances, volumes, pages and pages of numbers that described a human body broken down into data points. My body, my exact measurements, written in handwriting that grew increasingly frantic, increasingly familiar. On the last page, a single line. The room measures you back. I heard footsteps above me, not the usual irregular pattern, but deliberate, pacing, measuring. The smell of iron and cork was overwhelming now, coating my throat, my lungs. I stood up and the room spun, or I spun, or both. The walls were closer, the ceiling lower, or I was larger, or smaller. The proportions were all wrong. My phone buzzed. A text from the landlord. Maintenance tomorrow. Need to check the lower compartment. I typed back. There is no lower compartment. Response. Not yet. I looked back at the corner. The baseboard was intact, painted over, no sign of disturbance. The bag was gone. But the library card was in my pocket. The photo now showing someone I didn't recognize at all. Someone too tall and too short simultaneously. Someone whose face was mine but wasn't. Someone who had been measured and found wanting. I started packing immediately, throwing clothes into suitcases without folding them. But each time I tried to leave, I found myself back at the closet, staring at those marks on the doorframe. They were moving now, crawling up and down like living things, like they were measuring the air itself. I called the university library. They had no record of the card, no record of me, no record of anyone with my name backward or forward. But while I was on the phone, I heard it. A whisper in the static, or maybe in the walls, or maybe in my own head. You're being measured. The maintenance man arrived at 3 a.m. I hadn't given him a key, but he was inside anyway, kneeling by the corner where the baseboard had been, where it had never been. He was taking measurements, writing in a notebook identical to the one I'd found. He looked up at me, and his face was wrong, stretched and compressed, like someone had been adjusting his proportions with invisible hands. He spoke, but the words came from the walls, from the pipes, from the closet. You're the right size now. I ran, out of the apartment, down the stairs, into the Seattle rain. But when I reached the street, I realized I was still holding the tape measure, and I was still counting. Steps, breaths, heartbeats. Measuring myself against the world, finding myself coming up short or too long, never quite right. I found a hotel, but the room felt wrong, too spacious, too regular. I measured it obsessively, getting different numbers each time. The smell followed me, iron and cork, stronger when I stopped moving. I've changed hotels 3 times. The measurements are never right. The walls are always too close or too far. I still have the library card. The photo changes every time I look at it, showing variations of me that shouldn't exist. Me at impossible heights, impossible angles, impossible proportions. The expiration date is always yesterday or tomorrow, never today. Sometimes I get texts from the landlord. The room is available again. Special discount for returning tenants. The lower compartment has been renovated. I delete them all, but I've saved the address. Because late at night, when the hotel walls feel like they're breathing, when I can taste iron and cork in the recycled air, when I find myself measuring the distance between my reflection and my face, I think about going back, about checking if the marks on the doorframe have grown, about opening the lower compartment again, properly this time. The room is still measuring me. Distance doesn't matter. Time doesn't matter. Every space I enter becomes that studio. Every closet has those marks. Every corner might hide that impossible compartment. I've become a student of dimensions that don't add up, of spaces that exist and don't exist simultaneously. My thesis advisor says my work has taken an interesting turn, something about liminal spaces and psychological architecture. She doesn't notice that I measure her office every time I visit, that the numbers never match. She doesn't smell the iron and cork that follows me like a signature. She doesn't see me checking the baseboards, looking for loose spots, listening for hollow spaces that shouldn't be there. But I know the truth now. We're all being measured. Every room, every building, every space we inhabit takes our dimensions and stores them somewhere. Most people never notice. Most people's measurements stay consistent. Most people never find their lower compartment. I wasn't supposed to find mine either. But now that I have, I can't stop looking for others. In every corner, behind every baseboard, in every impossible space where the dimensions don't quite add up. They're all there, waiting. All those hidden compartments holding the wrong measurements of everyone who's ever lived in these carefully proportioned boxes we call homes. The studio is still available. The rent is still impossibly cheap. Someone new will move in, drawn by the price and the convenience. They'll notice the closet bar at the wrong height. They'll see the marks on the door frame. They'll smell iron and cork late at night. And eventually, inevitably, they'll find the letters I left in the mailbox. 7 of them, each beginning with, "If you still live there." Because that's what we do. We measure, and we are measured. We warn, and we ignore warnings. We find compartments that don't exist, and we open them anyway. The room is still measuring me. Even here, even now, typing this in a hotel that smells increasingly of iron and cork, I can feel it taking my dimensions, storing them somewhere I'll never quite find but can never stop looking for. The baseboards are loosening. All of them, everywhere, all at once. Don't open the lower compartment. There isn't one. Not yet. Story 11. The first time I noticed the van, I'd been driving for 14 hours straight, my eyes burning from the glare of oncoming headlights and the endless scroll of the rideshare app. Phoenix at 3 in the morning has a particular quality to it. The heat still radiating from the asphalt despite the darkness. The streetlights casting everything in that sickly amber glow that makes shadows look like they're breathing. I pulled into my street, shoulders aching, mind fuzzy with exhaustion, and there it was. A silver van parked at the corner where Mesquite Avenue dead ends into desert scrub. Nothing remarkable about it, really. Just another vehicle in a city full of them. Except for the parking lights, 2 pale yellow eyes staring through the darkness, neither fully on nor completely off, existing in that liminal space between presence and absence. The van sat precisely where the city's surveillance camera had been vandalized 6 months ago, the mounting bracket still jutting from the pole like a broken bone. I remember thinking it was odd, parking there at that hour with the lights on, but exhaustion has a way of dulling curiosity. I went inside, collapsed into bed, and forgot about it entirely. Until the next week. Same time, same exhaustion, same ache in my shoulders. But this time, I was alert enough to notice the pattern. Every other Tuesday, like clockwork. Always after my longest shifts. Always in that exact spot where electronic eyes couldn't reach. The van never moved while I watched, but I never saw it arrive either. It would simply be there when I turned onto my street, and gone by morning when I left for my first pickup. I started paying attention to details. The license plate was always partially obscured by dirt. Different sections clean each time, so I could never piece together the full number. The windows were tinted beyond legal limits. Black holes that reflected nothing. No company logos. No distinguishing marks except for a small dent in the rear bumper that looked like a face in profile if you squinted just right. The 4th time I saw it, or was it the 5th, I decided to confront whoever was inside. My hand was on the door handle when my phone buzzed with a ride request. Urgent pickup, surge pricing, too good to pass up. By the time I'd declined it and looked back, The van's lights were off. Just another dead vehicle on a dead-end street. I sat there for 10 minutes, watching, but nothing moved behind those black windows. Eventually, I went inside, double-locked my door, and tried to convince myself I was being paranoid. Phoenix does things to your mind. The heat, the isolation, the endless sprawl of identical neighborhoods. It all blurs together until you're not sure if you're driving the same route or stuck in some cosmic loop. The rideshare app becomes your only anchor to reality, each ping a confirmation that yes, you exist, yes, people need you, yes, you're moving through space and time like everyone else. But the van started appearing in my peripheral vision during rides. I'd glimpse silver in my mirror, check again, and find nothing. Or I'd see it 3 cars back at a red light, only to lose it when the light turned green. The mind plays tricks when you're tired, when you've been staring at taillights for hours, when every third vehicle in Phoenix is some shade of silver or gray. Then came the Tuesday when everything shifted. I'd accepted a ride request from downtown to Ahwatukee, a solid 40-minute drive across the city. My passenger was a woman who spent the entire ride on her phone, speaking in hushed tones about meeting deadlines and client expectations. Normal Tuesday night stuff. I dropped her at a gated community, waited for the 5-star rating that never came, and started the drive back. That's when I saw it. The silver van, parked on a side street barely a block from where I'd just dropped off my passenger. The parking lights were on, that same sickly yellow glow, but something was different. A bright yellow smiley face sticker on the bumper, fresh and garish against the dusty silver paint. The kind of sticker you'd see on a kid's notebook, but sized up, wrong. Its smile too wide, and eyes just black dots. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. Ahwatukee was 30 miles from my neighborhood, different side of the city entirely. The chances of the same van being here, now, with a new addition that seemed specifically designed to be noticed. My mind ran through probability calculations while my foot pressed harder on the accelerator. I took a different route home, longer, illogical, through neighborhoods I'd never serviced before. My phone kept pinging with ride requests, but I ignored them all, eyes flicking between the road and my mirrors. Nothing followed, no silver shape in the darkness. When I finally turned onto my street at 4:30 in the morning, the corner was empty, just the broken camera mount and desert shadows. That's when I started changing everything. Tuesday became Thursday. 3 a.m. became midnight, then 5 a.m., then 7 p.m. I'd drive different cars, rentals when I could afford them, borrowing a friend's sedan, anything to break the pattern. I installed a dash cam, then 2, then 4, covering every angle of my vehicle. I started keeping logs, dates, times, locations, weather conditions, anything that might reveal a pattern beyond the obvious. The van adapted. Now it appeared on Wednesdays or Fridays, or not at all for 2 weeks before showing up 3 nights in a row. The smiley face sticker multiplied. 2, then 3, then a whole row of them across the bumper like a twisted scorecard, each one slightly different. One with X's for eyes, another with a single tear, a third with no eyes at all, just that horrible empty smile. I tried photographing it once. My phone camera refused to focus, every shot coming out blurred and distorted, the van looking more like a silver smear against the darkness. The dashcam footage from those nights showed only static during the exact minutes when I knew the van was there. Electronic interference, maybe, or something else. Something that didn't want to be documented. Sleep became negotiable. I'd park down the street from my own house, watching the corner through binoculars borrowed from a pawn shop. I saw the van arrive once. Didn't see it exactly. More like it existed between one blink and the next. One moment the corner was empty. The next moment it had always been there, as if reality had edited itself while I wasn't paying attention. My rideshare ratings started dropping. Passengers complained I took strange routes, that I seemed distracted, that I kept checking mirrors and muttering to myself. The app warned me about maintaining service standards. I wanted to explain, to tell them about the van, about the stickers multiplying like a disease, about how it knew where I'd be before I did. But how do you explain something that sounds insane even to yourself? The breaking point came on a Tuesday that had become a Thursday that was actually a Saturday. I'd lost track of my own disruption patterns. the calendar becoming as unreliable as everything else. 4:17 a.m. according to my phone, though the darkness outside felt deeper than any 4 a.m. I'd known. I'd just finished a ride to the airport, was heading home on empty streets when the app pinged. New ride request, pickup location, my address, my exact address, down to the apartment number I'd never listed anywhere on the app. The passenger name showed as Rider in all caps. No photo, no rating. The destination was blank, just a pulsing question mark on the map. My finger hovered over the decline button, but something, curiosity, exhaustion, the inevitability that had been building for weeks, made me accept. The message came through immediately. Can you come down? I was 15 miles from home, sitting in my car in an airport cell phone lot, but somehow I knew that if I looked in my rearview mirror, I'd see it. The silver van, parking lights on, all those smiley face stickers glowing in the dark like phosphorescent teeth. I didn't look, couldn't look. My hands shook as I typed back, I'm not home. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, yes you are. My phone screen flickered. The GPS showed my location as my apartment complex, the little blue dot pulsing right where my assigned parking space would be. But I could see the airport tower in front of me, could hear the planes overhead, could smell the jet fuel on the desert wind. 2 realities, overlapping, both equally true and equally impossible. Another message. 3rd floor window. Wave if you can see me. My apartment was on the 3rd floor. Corner unit. The window faced the street, directly overlooking where the van always parked. I kept my eyes fixed, straight ahead, fighting every instinct to check if somehow I was in both places at once. The phone buzzed again. You waved. Come down now. I hadn't moved, hadn't waved, hadn't done anything but sit frozen in my car while reality folded in on itself like origami made of nightmares. But somewhere, in some version of this moment, maybe I had. Maybe there was another me, standing at that window, looking down at a silver van that was both there and here and nowhere at all. The app showed the ride had started. The timer was running, dollars and cents accumulating for a trip that couldn't be happening. My phone screen showed my car moving through streets I wasn't driving on, turning corners that didn't exist in the parking lot, approaching a destination that was somehow both my apartment and somewhere else entirely. Almost here, came another message. Leave the car running. I turned off my phone, threw it in the glove compartment, started driving, not home, but away, toward the desert, toward anywhere that wasn't Phoenix. But every street led back to familiar territory. Every highway ramp curved impossibly, depositing me closer to my neighborhood despite driving in the opposite direction. The city had become a Mobius strip, and I was trapped on its surface. When I finally arrived at my street, not by choice, but by the inevitable gravity of whatever was happening, the van was there. Of course it was there. It had always been there, would always be there, was there even when it wasn't. The parking lights painted everything in that sick yellow glow, and now I could see someone in the driver's seat. Just a silhouette, human-shaped but wrong in proportions I couldn't quite identify. My phone, still in the glove compartment, somehow rang with an incoming call. The screen, visible through the plastic, showed my own number calling itself. I didn't answer. The voicemail notification popped up immediately. I listened to it later, much later, after I'd spent 3 hours sitting in my car, watching the van, waiting for something to happen that never did. The message was my voice, but hollow, echoed, like it was coming from the bottom of a well or the inside of a metal tube. You can't keep us both waiting. One of you has to choose. The van disappeared at sunrise, evaporating with the morning heat like dew on asphalt. But the smiley face stickers remained, scattered on the ground where it had been parked, each one burning itself into the concrete until they became permanent shadows on the street. I still drive, still accept rides, still come home to my apartment that may or may not be where I actually live. The van appears randomly now, sometimes silver, sometimes white, sometimes a color that doesn't have a name but makes my teeth ache to look at. The stickers change too. Smiley faces, frowning faces, faces with too many eyes or mouths where eyes should be. Last night, Every ride request came from my own address. Different names, different photos, but always my apartment number, my street, my zip code. I declined them all, but the app showed them as completed anyway. 5-star ratings from passengers I never picked up for rides I never gave. This morning, I found a smiley face sticker on my bathroom mirror. It wasn't there when I went to bed. When I tried to peel it off, there was another underneath, and another, and another. Layers upon layers, going deeper than the mirror should allow, each smile wider and wronger than the last. The van is outside right now, both outside and not outside, there and not there, real and unreal. The parking lights pulse in a rhythm that matches my heartbeat, or maybe my heartbeat has started matching them. It's Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, all days and no day. Every moment happening simultaneously in a phoenix that exists between the phoenix everyone else knows and the phoenix that knows me. My phone buzzes. Another ride request. The pickup location is inside my apartment. Not at my apartment. Inside it. The coordinates place it exactly where I'm standing, as if the passenger is occupying the same space I am, waiting in a dimension just slightly offset from mine. I accept the ride. I always accept the ride, even when I decline. I've already accepted it somewhere else. Someone else in the phoenix that exists in the silver van's reflection, in the space between the smiley face stickers, in the gap where the city camera can't see. The message comes through. Look in the mirror. I don't want to, but I already have, will have, am having. In the reflection, I'm not alone. I'm never alone. The passenger has always been here, waiting in the spaces between seconds, patient as phoenix heat, inevitable as that silver van parked where surveillance fails. I can't see their face clearly. It keeps shifting, features rearranging like they're being viewed through water or heat shimmer. But they're smiling. Of course they're smiling. That same too-wide smile from the stickers, from the messages, from the voicemails I leave myself from numbers that don't exist. The app shows the ride has been completed. 5 stars. Generous tip. Comment. Thanks for the ride. See you next Tuesday. It's always next Tuesday in Phoenix. Always that silver van. Always those parking lights watching. Always someone waiting for a ride that's already over, already beginning. Never quite either. I still drive. What else can I do? The city needs its drivers. The app needs its vehicles. The van needs its witness. We're all part of the same system now. The same loop. The same ride that never ends in a phoenix that never sleeps. Where the heat makes you see things that aren't there until they are. Where every street leads back to that corner where the camera can't see. Where the silver van waits with its parking lights on, and its stickers multiplying and its passenger, who might be me, might be you, might be everyone who's ever driven too long into the desert night and wondered if they ever really made it home. The sun is rising now, or setting. In Phoenix, sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. The van will be gone soon, or it will have never left, or it will be everywhere at once, silver bleeding into the heat shimmer until the whole city is just one big parking light. Watching, waiting, smiling that horrible empty smile. My phone buzzes. New ride request. I always accept. Story 12. The call came at 2:47 a.m., which should have been my first warning. In my line of work, 24-hour locksmith services in St. Paul, late-night calls usually meant drunk college kids locked out of dorms or panicked parents with toddlers who'd managed to lock themselves in bathrooms. This was neither. The woman's voice on the phone had a peculiar quality, like she was speaking through water or from the bottom of a well. She explained that her daughter was traveling and needed someone to unlock what she called a silly lock at the back of the house. The mother would be waiting for me. The address was in the old Hamline Midway district, one of those neighborhoods where Victorian houses stood like decaying teeth in the mouth of progress. I arrived at 3:20 a.m., my van's headlights cutting through the thick Minnesota fog that had rolled in from the Mississippi. The house sat back from the street, its windows dark except for a faint glow from what I assumed was the living room. The porch light flickered, not broken but rhythmic, like Morse code spelling out words I couldn't decipher. The mother met me at the front door before I could knock. She was perhaps 70, wrapped in a housecoat that might have been fashionable in the 1950s, her gray hair pinned in a style that matched. What struck me most were her eyes. They never quite focused on me, always looking slightly past my shoulder, as if watching something behind me. She led me through the house without speaking, and I followed, my tool bag creating a metallic symphony with each step. The interior smelled of old wallpaper and something else, something organic and sweet, like overripe fruit left too long in summer heat. Family photos lined the hallway, but in the dim light, I couldn't make out the faces. They seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them, rearranging themselves in my peripheral vision. The back door was solid oak, probably original to the house. The lock was indeed unusual, a vintage mortise lock that I'd only seen in architectural salvage yards. The mother stood behind me as I knelt to examine it, and I could feel her presence like a weight on my shoulders, pressing down with more force than her frail frame should possess. I inserted my pick and tension wrench, feeling for the pins. The lock was cold, far colder than the ambient temperature warranted, and my fingers began to numb almost immediately. I worked the pins, but something was wrong. They moved, but not in any pattern I recognized. It was as if the internal mechanism was rearranging itself with each attempt, learning my techniques and countering them. That's when I noticed the light. Through the crack under the door, I could see light from what the mother had mentioned was the living room, a light she thought her daughter might have left on. But it wasn't steady. It pulsed and dimmed, brightened and faded, like someone was playing with a dimmer switch. Slow at first, then faster, then slow again. The pattern made my stomach turn, though I couldn't say why. I tried my electric pick gun next. The moment it touched the lock, the tool died. Not just stopped working, but died completely, as if it had never held a charge. The battery compartment was ice cold, and when I opened it, frost had formed on the contacts. The mother remained silent behind me, but I could hear her breathing. Deep, rhythmic, almost mechanical. The light under the door began to strobe more intensely, and with it came a sound. Not quite music, not quite voices, but something in between. It reminded me of tuning a radio between stations, catching fragments of transmissions from somewhere far away. My hands shook as I tried manual picks again, and this time, I felt the lock actively fighting me. The pins pushed back against my tools with deliberate force. I suggested we postpone until morning, my voice cracking slightly. The mother tilted her head at an angle that seemed anatomically improbable, and simply nodded. She didn't insist, didn't argue, just smiled with lips that were too wide for her face. As she walked me back through the house, I noticed the family photos had changed. The faces were clearer now, but they were all the same face, repeated in different clothes, different poses, different decades. I fled. There's no other word for it. I got in my van and drove home, checking my mirrors obsessively, certain I'd see that house following me somehow. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that pulsing light, felt that impossible cold. At 7 a.m., I turned on the local news while making coffee with shaking hands. The lead story made me drop my mug. Security footage from a house in Hamline Midway showed 3 figures in dark hoods calmly exiting through a back door, the same door I'd tried to open hours before. They moved with an unsettling synchronization, like puppets controlled by a single hand, each carrying identical white boxes. The reporter mentioned that neighbors had heard nothing, seen nothing unusual, except for one detail that made my blood freeze. The house had been empty for 3 years. The last owner had disappeared, leaving only a note that said she was going to join them. I recognized the door immediately. The same solid oak, the same peculiar lock. My phone rang. Unknown number. I knew before I answered that it would be her, the woman who'd originally called. Her voice still had that underwater quality, but now I heard something else beneath it, like multiple voices speaking in almost perfect unison. She wanted to pay for my services, she said. Could I send her an invoice? My hands moved without my conscious control, typing up the bill, adding my bank details. Before I sent it, she asked me to add a note to the invoice, a reminder for next time. Her exact words burned themselves into my memory. Next time, don't knock. They like silence. I added the note and sent the invoice. The payment came through immediately, 3 times my normal rate. For weeks after, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd narrowly avoided something catastrophic. I stopped taking night calls. I had the locks on my own doors changed twice, then 3 times, but sometimes, late at night, I'd hear my doorknob turn slowly, testing. I'd see shadows under my door that moved wrong, that had too many angles. And once, just once, I found frost on my bedroom lock in the middle of July. I've started researching the house. What I've found doesn't help me sleep. There are records going back to 1892 of people being called to that address for various services. Plumbing, electrical work, pest control. They all report the same thing. An impossible problem. A presence that shouldn't be there. And always, always, that pulsing light. Many of them disappeared within a year of their visit. The ones who didn't, they changed. Their families reported they became distant, that they would stand at windows for hours watching nothing, that they spoke of them without ever explaining who them were. Last night I saw the mother again. She was standing across the street from my apartment at 3 a.m., still in that 1950s housecoat, still smiling too wide. She wasn't alone. 3 hooded figures stood with her, perfectly still, each holding a white box. They stayed there until dawn, never moving, never wavering. When the sun finally rose, they were gone. But there was frost on my window in the shape of words. They remember you. The invoice was paid again this morning, triple the amount, though I never sent another one. The transaction note said only, for future services. I'm writing this because I need someone to know in case I disappear like the others. Or worse, in case I don't disappear but become something else. Something that stands too still and smiles too wide and speaks of them in voices that aren't quite human. The lock on my apartment door turned by itself again last night. This time I didn't check it. I've learned that some doors are meant to stay closed, and some questions are better left unasked. But I know, with a certainty that sits like ice in my chest, that one night soon, that door will open, and when it does, I'll either run, or I'll finally understand what the light was trying to show me, what those boxes contain, and why they like silence. The worst part isn't the fear. It's the growing certainty that part of me wants to know. Part of me wants to open that door myself, to walk back to that house, to knock despite the warning. Because sometimes, late at night when the world is quiet and my lock starts to frost over, I can almost hear them calling. And their voices sound exactly like mine. Story 13. The first time I heard the voice, I was measuring the crown molding in what would become my study. The house on Gray Street had been a steel, a Queen Anne Victorian from 1910, all gingerbread trim and broken promises, waiting in Richmond's Churchill neighborhood like a patient spider. 3 stories of peeling paint and rotting wood that the realtor assured me had good bones. At 43 after the divorce, I needed something to pour myself into, something that would occupy my hands and exhaust my mind enough to sleep without pills. It was 2:12 a.m. according to the grandfather clock I'd inherited from my father, the only piece of furniture I'd brought to the empty house. The chime had just finished its hollow announcement when I heard footsteps on the main staircase. Not the settling of old wood or the complaint of century-old joists. These were deliberate, measured steps, each one pressing into the runner with purpose. Then the voice, clear as morning. "Elaine?" A man's voice, neither young nor old, carrying up from the first floor with the particular quality of someone who expected an answer. I stood frozen in the doorway, my tape measure suddenly feeling like a child's toy in my hand. Elaine? Closer now, perhaps halfway up the stairs. The rational part of my brain cataloged possibilities. Squatter, previous owner with a key, confused neighbor. But something in the voice's tone, intimate, familiar, seeking, made my skin prickle with primitive warning. I forced myself to the landing, gripping the banister hard enough to feel splinters threatening through my work gloves. "She doesn't live here," I called down into the darkness. My voice cracked like a teenager's. Silence stretched for 3 heartbeats. Then, from perhaps 5 steps below where I couldn't see, "Yes, she does." The footsteps resumed their climb. I backed away from the landing, my heel catching on a loose floorboard that groaned in protest. But when I gathered courage to look again, the staircase was empty. No shadow, no sound, nothing but the house's usual repertoire of complaints. I told myself it was exhaustion. 3 weeks of 16-hour renovation days, breathing in decades of dust and God knows what else. The brain plays tricks when it's tired. I went back to my measuring, but my hands shook too badly to read the numbers. The next night, I was ready. I'd installed motion sensors on the stairs and a camera at the landing, connecting everything to my laptop. At 2:10, I positioned myself in the hallway watching the feed. At 2:12, the footsteps began again. The sensors didn't trigger. The camera showed an empty staircase, but I heard him clear as day. "Elaine?" This time I noticed something else. A smell rising with the voice. Not decay or mold, but something medicinal and sweet. Ether, maybe, or chloroform. The kind of smell that belonged in old hospitals or Victorian operating theaters. I started sleeping at a motel, returning only during daylight to work on the house. But curiosity is a terrible thing, especially when mixed with the particular masculine stubbornness that refuses to be driven from one's own property. After a week, I decided to research the house's history. The Richmond Library's archives yielded little at first. Property records showed a succession of unremarkable owners, families who stayed a few years, then moved on. But in the newspaper morgue, hunting through boxes of yellowed clippings, I found something that made my hands go cold. An advertisement from 1913, "Rooms to let, Mrs. E. Lane's respectable boarding house for gentlemen, 1447 Gray Street, weekly rates, discretion assured. Elaine. I drove back to the house with the printout trembling on my passenger seat. The second-floor hallway had been my next project. 3 layers of wallpaper dating back decades, each one hiding the sins of the previous. I'd been steaming it off in sections, revealing the original plaster beneath. Now I attacked it with new purpose, pulling away sheets of roses and stripes and geometric patterns. Behind the 3rd layer, near the floor by the back bedroom, I found it, penciled directly on the plaster in a careful feminine hand. "If anyone hears my name, don't come down." The wallpaper came away in my hands like old skin. That night I couldn't stay away. I sat on the landing at 2 a.m. waiting. The house seemed to hold its breath with me, every shadow deeper, every corner darker. The grandfather clock's ticking became thunderous. At 2:12, the footsteps began. But this time, something was different. There were 2 sets, one heavy, ascending, one light, descending. They met somewhere in the middle of the staircase. "Elaine?" The man's voice, urgent now. Then, for the first time, a woman's voice, barely a whisper. "Don't come up. Please, don't come up anymore." The medicinal smell was overwhelming, making my eyes water and my throat close. I pressed myself against the wall, certain that if I moved, if I made any sound, I would become part of whatever scene was replaying in the bones of this house. "You have to eat," the man's voice insisted. "You have to let me help you." "The others will hear," she whispered. "They'll know what you've done." "What I've done. What we've done, Elaine. What we've done together." The voices were moving now, circling each other on the stairs like dancers. I could hear fabric rustling, the creak of wood under shifting weight. The smell grew stronger, definitely chloroform, mixed with something else. Lavender. Old blood. I must have passed out. When I woke, dawn was breaking through the landing window, and my laptop showed 6:47 a.m. The house was silent except for the normal sounds of an old building waking up, pipes expanding, wood settling. But there was something in my hand, a brass key, tarnished black with age, with a paper tag attached by a piece of rotting string. The tag read, in the same careful handwriting as the wall, Room 3, do not disturb. I knew I should leave, pack my tools, hand the keys back to the realtor, forfeit my deposit, and never look back. But the key felt warm in my palm, almost pulse-like, and I found myself climbing to the third floor. The third floor had been servants' quarters originally, converted into small rooms when the house became a boarding establishment. I'd barely been up there. The stairs were treacherous, and the whole floor had a strange quality to it, as if the air was thicker, older, less willing to circulate. Room 3 was at the back, its door painted over so many times that the number was barely visible. The key turned easily, too easily, as if the lock had been waiting. Inside, the room was wrong. Not destroyed or damaged, wrong. The wallpaper was fresh, a pattern of cabbage roses that I'd just spent weeks removing from the second floor. A narrow bed with a brass frame sat against one wall, its covers turned down as if waiting for someone. A washstand with a porcelain basin and pitcher. A small table with an oil lamp, its wick trimmed and ready. But it was the smell that made me stagger. Chloroform so strong my vision blurred, and underneath it, that lavender and copper scent. On the small table beside the lamp was a doctor's bag, leather with tarnished brass clasps. Next to it, a piece of paper. I picked it up with numb fingers. It was a receipt from 1913 for medical services rendered. The patient's name was E. Lane. The doctor's name was scratched out, but the amount was clear. $50, an enormous sum for that time. The kind of money paid for services that couldn't be spoken of. Procedures done in back rooms and boarding houses where discretion was assured. Under the receipt was a photograph, a woman, young, pretty in that serious Victorian way, staring at the camera with eyes that seemed to look through me. On the back, in pencil, Mrs. E. Lane, 1913. Tell them I went to visit my sister in Petersburg. I heard the footsteps on the stairs again. Not from below this time, but coming up to the third floor. Heavy, purposeful, the tread of a man who knew exactly where he was going. The doorknob began to turn. I ran, down the narrow stairs, through the second floor, past the landing where I'd spent so many nights waiting. Behind me, I heard him calling, not questioning anymore, but demanding, "Elaine, I know you're here." I grabbed my laptop, my tools, anything I could carry, and fled to my truck. As I drove away, I looked back once. In the third floor window, Room 3's window, a figure stood watching. Not the man. Her. She raised one hand, whether in warning or farewell, I couldn't tell. I never went back. The realtor was confused but willing to tear up the contract for a fee. The house went back on the market. I heard it sold quickly to a young couple from DC looking for a project, but I kept the key. I don't know why. It sits in my desk drawer, wrapped in cloth, still warm to the touch. Sometimes late at night, I unwrap it and hold it, and I can smell chloroform and lavender. Sometimes I hear her voice, just at the edge of hearing. Don't come down. I looked up the records. Later, Mrs. E. Lane disappeared in September 1913. The boarding house closed the same month. The doctor who signed that receipt, I found him too. Dr. William Marsh, who ran a quiet practice specializing in women's troubles and discreet medical services. He died in 1914, falling down the stairs of his own home at approximately 2 hours in the morning. The coroner ruled it accidental, noting only that the doctor had seemed distracted and unwell in his final weeks, often being heard talking to himself in empty rooms. The young couple who bought the house? They lasted 6 months. The listing is back up now. The price dropped by 30%. The realtor's description mentions charming period details and original architectural elements. It doesn't mention the way the stairs creak at 2:12 a.m., or the smell that rises from nowhere, or the woman's voice that whispers warnings that come too late. I drive by sometimes, never stopping, just slowing enough to look up at that third-floor window. Once I swear I saw her there, pressing her palm against the glass. Once I saw him too, standing behind her, his hand on her shoulder. The key grows warmer when I pass the house, pulsing like something alive. I've thought about throwing it away, but I know it would find its way back. Some doors, once opened, can never really be closed. Some voices once heard echo forever in the spaces between waking and sleep. And sometimes, in my new apartment across town, at 2:12 a.m., I hear footsteps in my hallway. Not his, hers, light, hesitant, pacing back and forth as if she's trying to decide whether to knock. I lie still, hardly breathing, remembering her warning. If anyone hears my name, don't come down. I never answer. I never call out. But I know she's there, waiting in the darkness beyond my door, forever caught between rooms, between floors, between whatever happened in 1913 and whatever continues to happen in that house on Gray Street. The key sits in my drawer, warm and waiting. Sometimes I think about going back, using it one more time, seeing what really lies behind that door. But then I remember the smell of chloroform, the weight of footsteps on old stairs, and the sound of a man's voice calling for a woman who can never quite escape. Some houses aren't haunted by the dead. They're haunted by moments. Terrible, irreversible moments that stain the very wood and plaster, playing out again and again like a record with a broken groove. The house on Gray Street is one of those places. And Mrs. E. Lane, whatever she was, whatever was done to her or what she did, is its permanent resident. I still have the key. It's still warm. And every night at 2:12 a.m., I wonder what would happen if I answered when she finally knocks. Story 14. The garden-level apartment in Chicago had seemed like such a steal. Now, 3 weeks into my lease, I understood why the previous tenant had broken his contract 4 months early. It started with the keys. I'd been dead asleep when my keychain slipped off the nightstand at 3:17 a.m., hitting the hardwood floor with a metallic clatter that shouldn't have been loud enough to wake me. But it wasn't the sound that jolted me upright. It was the laugh that followed, short, feminine, distinctly amused, like someone had just heard the punchline to a private joke. The sound came from directly outside my door, maybe 3 feet from where I lay frozen in bed. My apartment's entrance opened straight into a long, narrow hallway that ran the length of the building. Being garden level meant I was half underground, the windows at sidewalk height, the ceiling low enough that I could touch it without stretching. The hallway outside had no windows, just fluorescent lights that buzzed like dying insects and cast everything in a sickly yellow pallor. I crept to the door, avoiding the squeaky floorboard near the kitchen, and pressed my eye to the peephole. The fisheye lens distorted the empty hallway into a tunnel that seemed to stretch infinitely in both directions. Nothing moved. No shadows flickered. The laugh had cut off the instant I'd looked, as if someone had pressed pause on a recording. The next night, I tested it. At 3:23 a.m., I deliberately dropped a spoon. The laugh came immediately. Closer this time, pressed against the door itself. When I looked through the peephole, the hallway was empty, but I could smell something through the gap under the door. Perfume, cloying and floral, like gardenias left too long in a vase. I installed a camera the following week. Nothing fancy, just a wireless model I could monitor from my phone. I positioned it to capture the entire stretch of hallway outside my door. That night, I lay in bed with my phone propped on the pillow beside me, watching the grainy feed. At 3:31 a.m., I rattled my keys. The laugh came right on cue, but on my phone screen, the hallway remained empty. Then the audio distorted, the speaker crackling with static as if overwhelmed by input. Through the white noise, I heard it, the distinct click, click, click of high heels on linoleum growing louder, approaching my door. On the video feed, nothing. In my apartment, the footsteps stopped directly outside. The doorknob didn't turn, but I heard breathing. Slow, deliberate inhalations as if someone were trying to smell something through the crack. I stopped making noise between 3 and 4 a.m. For a week, the apartment fell silent during that cursed hour. I'd lie rigid in bed, barely breathing, watching the camera feed. Sometimes I'd catch movement in my peripheral vision, a shadow sliding across the gap under the door, gone when I looked directly at it. The smell of gardenias grew stronger each night, seeping through the ventilation until I'd wake up gagging on the sweetness. Then I found the lipstick. I'd been avoiding the peephole since installing the camera, relying on technology instead of my own eyes. But that morning, something made me look. There, on the outside of the peephole, was a perfect lip print in deep red, as if someone had pressed their mouth against the glass to listen better, or to whisper something through. The building manager claimed ignorance when I called. She suggested maybe teenagers were playing pranks, though she admitted she'd never seen any hanging around the garden-level units. The hallway, she reminded me, was monitored by security cameras. I could request the footage if I filed a formal complaint. I did. The footage showed nothing. Hours of empty hallway, broken only by my own comings and goings. Even the timestamp from when I'd installed my camera showed just me, alone, mounting the device while seemingly talking to no one. Watching myself on that grainy security footage, I looked insane, gesturing at empty air, flinching at nothing, my mouth moving in conversation with silence. The lipstick marks multiplied. Every few days a new print would appear, sometimes overlapping the old ones, creating a collage of pursed lips on the convex glass. I tried cleaning them, but they'd return overnight, fresh and wet-looking, as if just applied. The shade was always the same, a deep burgundy that looked black in certain lights. I stopped sleeping during the witching hour, started taking walks instead. Chicago at 3 a.m. was its own kind of purgatory. Empty streets swept by lake wind, the L rumbling somewhere in the distance, streetlights creating pools of orange safety between stretches of darkness. But even outside, I felt watched. Every reflective surface, store windows, car mirrors, puddles, seemed to hold a figure just out of focus, standing still while I walked past. One night I decided to conduct an experiment. I'd record from inside the apartment while triggering the laugh. At 3:33 a.m., I stood in my living room, camera rolling, and dropped my keys. The laugh came instantly, but this time it wasn't alone. There was a second voice underneath it, barely audible, a man's voice pleading. The words were muffled, distorted, but I made out fragments. Please, can't breathe. The walls. On the playback, my camera had captured something the naked eye missed. In the reflection on my television screen, a woman stood behind me. Tall, wearing what looked like a vintage dress, her face obscured by long, dark hair. She wasn't laughing. She was opening and closing her mouth rhythmically, as if practicing speech or trying to remember how to form words. When I turned around in the video, nothing was there, but the reflection persisted for 3 more seconds, before fading like smoke. I researched the building's history. Built in 1953, converted to apartments in the 70s. Nothing unusual in the public records, but I found an old forum post from 2011. A woman claiming to be a former tenant described experiences identical to mine. The laugh at 3 a.m., the lipstick marks, the sensation of being watched. She'd moved out after 6 months, she wrote, when she'd started finding long, dark hairs in her bed that weren't hers. The post had no replies, and the account had been deleted. The distinction between sleeping and waking began to blur. I'd find myself standing at the peephole with no memory of getting out of bed, my eye pressed to the glass, staring at the empty hallway. Sometimes I'd be there for hours, according to my phone, though it felt like seconds. My lips would be numb afterward, tingling as if I'd been pressing them against something cold. I started recording myself sleeping. The footage was disturbing. Every night at 3 a.m., I'd sit up, eyes open but clearly unconscious, and walk to the door. I'd stand there swaying slightly, my hand on the knob but not turning it. My mouth would move as if in conversation, but no sound emerged. After exactly 1 hour, I'd return to bed, lie down in the same position, and remain still until morning. In one video, something else appeared. As I stood at the door in my unconscious state, a shadow passed underneath, but not from the hallway side. It came from inside my apartment, sliding out under the door as if something were leaving. The shadow had a distinctive shape, the silhouette of a woman in heels, stretched long and thin. I tried staying at a hotel, but at 3 a.m., I'd wake to find myself in the lobby, fully dressed, my car keys in hand. The night clerk said I'd walked past her without responding to her questions, my eyes fixed on something she couldn't see. She'd thought I was sleepwalking until I'd gotten in my car and driven away with disturbing precision. Back in the apartment, things escalated. The laughs became constant during the witching hour, a chorus of them, all slightly off sync. The lipstick marks spread from the peephole to the door itself, then to my windows, even appearing on my bathroom mirror. Always lips, never faces. Sometimes I'd find them on my own skin, perfect prints on my forearms, my neck, places I couldn't have reached myself. I set up more cameras, covering every angle of the apartment. What they captured defied explanation. In the footage, I'd see myself in multiple places simultaneously, standing at the door while also lying in bed, sitting at the kitchen table while also looking out the window. All versions of me moved independently, going about different activities, occasionally passing through each other like ghosts. The woman appeared more frequently in reflections. She was always behind me, no matter which way I turned. Her face remained hidden, but her posture suggested anticipation, like someone waiting for permission to speak. In the mirror, I'd sometimes see her lips moving in sync with mine, forming words I wasn't saying. I found a journal I didn't remember buying, filled with my handwriting. The entries were dated from before I'd moved in, describing experiences in the apartment I hadn't had yet. According to the journal, I'd been living here for years, documenting the same events over and over. The keys, the laugh, the lipstick, the woman. Each cycle ended the same way, with an entry that simply read, "She's inside now." The building manager called, concerned. She said I'd been leaving her voicemails at 3 a.m. every night for weeks, but I only spoke in whispers, and she couldn't understand what I was saying. When she played one back for me, I heard my voice, but underneath it was the woman's laugh, and underneath that, the man's pleading. All three sounds came from my throat simultaneously. I stopped distinguishing between what happened at night and what happened during the day. Time folded in on itself. I'd be making breakfast, then suddenly it was 3 a.m., and I was standing at the peephole. I'd be at work, then instantly in my bed, watching shadows play across the ceiling. The woman in the reflections grew clearer. She looked like me, or I looked like her. It was becoming hard to tell. Last night, or maybe tonight, the timeline has become negotiable. I didn't drop anything at 3 a.m. The laugh came anyway from inside the apartment, from my own throat. I walked to the mirror and saw her clearly for the first time. She was standing where I stood wearing my face, but her expression was one I'd never made. A mixture of triumph and terrible hunger. I reached out to touch the glass and she reached back. Our fingers met at the surface and I felt the cold seep through, traveling up my arm like injection. She smiled with my mouth, and I understood. She'd never been outside the door. She'd been waiting inside all along, inside the walls, inside the mirrors, inside the spaces between seconds at 3 a.m. The previous tenant hadn't broken his lease. He'd never left. He was the voice under the laugh, the shadow under the door, the reflection that lingered too long. And before him, another and another, stretching back to when the building was new and the walls were still learning how to hold their shape. I write this now, or maybe I wrote it weeks ago, or maybe I'm still writing it. The journal contains this story already, in my handwriting, dated tomorrow. The woman watches from every surface, patient as wallpaper. At 3 a.m., we'll trade places again, or maybe we already have. The lipstick marks on the peephole aren't meant to listen better. They're kisses goodbye from everyone who's tried to leave. I hear keys dropping somewhere in the building, followed by a new laugh. Confused, frightened, male. Someone else has moved into a garden-level unit. The cycle continues, or maybe it never started, or maybe it's always been happening. Time doesn't work right here, in the spaces between walls, in the reflection behind reflections. I should warn him, but when I try to leave my apartment, I find myself at the peephole instead, my lips pressed against the glass, leaving marks in a shade of burgundy that looks black in certain lights. The woman stands behind me, or I stand behind her, or we're the same person separated by a thickness of silver and glass. The building settles around us with a sound like laughter, like pleading, like the click of heels on linoleum walking toward a door that's already open, has always been open, will never close. At 3 a.m. tomorrow, which might be yesterday, I'll drop my keys again, or maybe someone else will, someone who thinks they've just moved into a steal of an apartment, not knowing they've already been here for years, writing in journals they don't remember buying, leaving lipstick marks in shades they've never worn, laughing at jokes only the walls understand. The woman at 3 doesn't come from outside. She's always been waiting in the room where you already are.